Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The dispatcher sent the load request at 11:47 p.m., which should have been my first warning. Nothing good comes from a last-minute haul offer, especially when it is routed through back highways in western Pennsylvania. But the rate was decent, and my truck payment was due, so I took it. 42,000 pounds of industrial piping from a shuttered mill outside Pittsburgh to a distribution center in Wheeling. Straight shot, maybe 5 hours if I kept moving. Easy money, or so I thought. My name is Rylan Mercier, and I've been running these Appalachian routes for going on 12 years now. I know every truck stop, every way station, every shortcut between the Ohio River and the Allegheny Mountains. I know where the state troopers like to hide with their radar guns, and I know which roads turn to ice first when the temperature drops. What I did not know until that cold November night was that some roads in Pennsylvania are not meant to be found at all. I left the loading dock just after midnight. The mill was one of those sad, hulking places that had been rotting since the 80s, all rusted metal and broken windows. The crew that loaded my trailer worked in silence, moving like ghosts under flickering sodium lights. They had me sign the paperwork without making eye contact, and when I asked about the best route to Wheeling, the foreman just pointed south and told me to follow my GPS. Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle, but I shrugged it off. Mill towns breed their own kind of gloom, especially the dead ones. The first hour went fine. I took Route 51 south out of Pittsburgh, watching the city lights fade in my mirrors as the road climbed into the hills. Traffic was light, just a few cars and the occasional truck heading the opposite direction. The cab was warm, the engine was running smooth, and I had a thermos of truck stop coffee that was only slightly terrible. I settled into that comfortable rhythm that comes from 1,000 nights on the road, where your hands know the steering wheel and your eyes scan the mirrors without thinking. Around 1:30 in the morning, my GPS announced a faster route available. I glanced at the screen and saw it wanted me to take an exit coming up in 2 miles. Cutting over to some county road that would supposedly save me 20 minutes. The route looked indirect, winding through the mountains instead of following the valley, but 20 minutes is 20 minutes. I signaled and took the exit, leaving behind the last of the streetlights and the occasional gas station. The county road was narrow, barely wide enough for my trailer to clear the trees on both sides. The pavement was old and cracked, with frost heaves that made the whole rig shudder every few hundred yards. No centerline paint, no shoulder, just a dark tunnel of bare branches overhead and the white glow of my headlights pushing into the November night. I checked my mirrors out of habit and saw nothing but darkness behind me. No other traffic, no lights from distant farms, nothing but the red glow of my own taillights reflected in the trees. After about 15 minutes on that county road, the GPS told me to turn right onto what it called Backbone Ridge Highway. I had never heard of it, which was unusual. I pride myself on knowing these mountains, but there are always a few back roads that stay off the main routes. The turn was marked by a faded green sign so covered in moss and road grime that I could barely read it. The sign said Backbone Ridge Highway, Mile 0, and underneath in smaller letters, alternate route, use caution. I made the turn, and immediately the road changed. The pavement was different, older, with that smooth concrete surface they used back in the 30s and 40s. The road was wider than the county route, built for 2 lanes with enough room for vehicles to pass, but something about it felt wrong. There were no houses along this highway, no driveways, no mailboxes, no signs of human presence at all. Just the road cutting through dense forest, climbing higher into the mountains with each passing mile. The GPS showed me en route, with an estimated arrival time in Wheeling of 6:15 a.m. But the route on the screen looked strange, like the road was taking me in a wide arc that did not match the straight line I should be following. I tapped the screen a few times, thinking maybe the map was glitching, but it insisted this was the fastest way. The little blue dot representing my truck crawled along a thin gray line that seemed to curve through an area where no other roads existed. At mile 12, I saw the first odd thing. A historical marker stood beside the road, one of those brown signs with white lettering that state governments put up to commemorate local history. But as my headlights swept across it, I could see the text was faded to the point of being illegible, and the post was leaning at an angle like it had been standing there for 50 years without maintenance. I slowed down to read it, but the words were too faint, and I was past it before I could make out more than a few letters. The road kept climbing, winding through cuts in the rock where the builders had blasted through the mountain rather than going around. The cuts were deep, with sheer walls of exposed stone on both sides that rose 20 or 30 feet above the roadbed. Water seeped from cracks in the rock, leaving dark stains and patches of ice where the sun never reached. My headlights caught the glint of ice crystals and the occasional frozen waterfall clinging to the stone face. At mile 18, I passed the first abandoned structure. It was a stone building set back from the road, maybe an old toll house or maintenance station. The roof had collapsed years ago, leaving just 4 walls and empty window frames that stared out at the highway like hollow eyes. Vines had grown up over the walls, and small trees were pushing through what had once been the floor. As I drove past, my headlights illuminated the interior for just a moment, and I could have sworn I saw fresh tire tracks in the dirt inside the building. But that made no sense because there was no way to drive in there, and the tracks disappeared before I could look again. Mile 23 brought the first tunnel entrance sign. The sign was old, with that distinctive shield shape they used in the 40s, and the paint had faded to a dull cream color. Tunnel ahead, 3 miles, lights required, closed to heavy vehicles. I felt my stomach tighten when I read that last part. Closed to heavy vehicles meant closed to trucks like mine, but my GPS was still showing this as the active route, still counting down the miles to Wheeling, still promising I would arrive on schedule. I grabbed my CB handset and tried Channel 19, the main trucker channel. "This is Ryland Mercier eastbound on Backbone Ridge Highway. Anybody out there familiar with this route?" Static answered me, thick and heavy like the sound of rain on a metal roof. I tried Channel 17, then Channel 9, the emergency channel. Nothing but static on every frequency, and underneath the static, a low hum that might have been electrical interference or might have been something else. The tunnel entrance appeared at mile 26, and I felt my breath catch when I saw it. The portal was massive, easily big enough for 2 lanes of traffic, built from huge blocks of cut stone that had darkened with age to the color of old blood. The entrance was framed by a concrete arch with Art Deco styling, the kind of engineering that spoke of Depression-era ambition and federal work programs. Above the arch, carved letters spelled out Mile 46 Bore, 1938, and underneath, in smaller letters that I could barely read, Abandoned, 1962, no entry. I hit my brakes, bringing the rig down to a crawl about 50 yards from the tunnel mouth. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to back up until I found a wide spot in the road, to get off this highway and back to civilization. But behind me was 18 miles of narrow mountain road with no place to turn around an 18-wheeler, and ahead was a tunnel that my GPS insisted was the fastest route to my destination. The computer showed me going straight through, following a route that apparently did not care whether the tunnel was officially closed or not. I sat there for a full minute, engine idling, staring at that dark opening in the mountain. The tunnel mouth was completely black, with no lights visible inside. No reflection from emergency fixtures or maintenance lighting. It was like looking into a throat, a passage that swallowed light and offered nothing in return. The concrete around the entrance was stained with decades of water seepage, and dead vines hung from the arch like dried tendons. The CB radio crackled, and through the static I thought I heard a voice. Just a few words, distorted and distant. "Don't follow?" The voice faded before I could respond, leaving only that low, electrical hum. I tried transmitting again, but the static had returned, thicker than before, almost aggressive in its white noise dominance. My GPS recalculated. Instead of showing 6:15 a.m., it now showed 7:45 a.m., a full hour and a half later than the original estimate. The route had changed too, suggesting I backtrack 18 miles and take a different road entirely. But backtracking meant an hour of reversing my path, then another hour to get around the mountain, and by then I would be so late that the delivery window would close. I would lose the job and probably take a penalty from the company. I looked at the tunnel entrance again. The opening was clearly big enough for my rig. The road leading in was paved and level. There were no physical barriers blocking entry, just that faded sign warning against heavy vehicles and the official abandonment notice. Maybe the closure was a formality, something they never bothered to enforce because nobody used this road anymore. Maybe trucks passed through here all the time and just did not talk about it on the CB. I put the transmission in gear and eased forward. My headlights pushed into the tunnel mouth, illuminating concrete walls that were stained with mineral deposits and streaked with rust. The roadbed inside looked intact, with lane markings still barely visible under layers of grime. I could see maybe 100 yards into the tunnel before the darkness swallowed everything. As I crossed the threshold, entering the mountain, the temperature inside the cab dropped 10 degrees in an instant. The heated air from my vents turned cold, and I could see my breath misting in front of my face. The sound changed too. The engine noise that had been my constant companion all night suddenly became muffled and strange, like I was hearing it through water. My headlights seemed dimmer inside the tunnel, their beams not reaching as far as they should. The tunnel walls closed in around me, massive concrete slabs that rose into darkness above my trailer height. Every few hundred feet, there were old light fixtures mounted on the walls, but they were all dark, their glass covers broken or missing entirely. Some of the fixtures had pulled away from the walls and hung at angles, held by corroded bolts and tangles of old wiring. The pavement under my wheels was covered with a fine layer of grit and dust that made my tires hiss with each rotation. I checked my mirrors and watched the tunnel entrance shrink behind me, the half moon of gray November sky getting smaller and smaller until it was just a dim circle in the distance. The darkness ahead stayed absolute, refusing to yield to my headlights no matter how far I drove. I felt like I was making no progress, like the tunnel was extending itself as I moved, staying always the same distance from end to end. At what my odometer said was a quarter mile inside, I saw the first vehicle. It was pulled over in the right lane, a tractor-trailer rig that looked like it had been parked there for a long time. The trailer was faded, the paint oxidized to a dull gray, and one of the tires was completely flat. But what made me slow down was the tractor unit, because even under the grime and dust, I could see it was the same make and model as mine. Same blue Kenworth, same year from what I could tell, same configuration. I eased past the abandoned truck, close enough that my mirror almost touched its trailer. As I drew level with the cab, my headlights illuminated the driver's side door, and I felt my chest tighten. The door was open, hanging at an angle on broken hinges, and the interior was completely empty. No driver, no personal items, no trash or paperwork or any sign that anyone had ever sat in that seat. Just bare vinyl and exposed springs and a thick coating of dust that looked like it had been accumulating for years. But the license plate visible in my mirror as I passed stopped me cold. The plate was from Pennsylvania, current registration, and the number was only 3 digits different from my own plate. I checked my mirror again, thinking I had misread it in the poor light, but the numbers were clear. That truck had been registered within weeks of mine, had probably been bought from the same dealer, had probably run the same routes I ran. I accelerated, putting distance between me and the abandoned rig, trying to ignore the implications. Lots of trucking companies buy fleets of identical vehicles, I told myself. It was just a coincidence that this particular truck matched mine so closely. The fact that it was abandoned in a closed tunnel just meant someone had broken down here before the tunnel was officially closed, and they had never bothered to retrieve the vehicle. That was all. Nothing strange about it. The CB radio crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer. Rila and Mercier, do not stop. Do not look back. Keep moving forward. The voice was male, middle-aged, with an Appalachian accent. But there was something wrong with the cadence, like the words were being spoken too slowly, with too much space between each syllable. I grabbed my handset. Who is this? How do you know my name? Static filled the speaker for 5 seconds. Then the voice returned. Check your mirror. The truck you passed. Look at the door. Against every instinct, I glanced at my mirror. The abandoned truck was still visible behind me, maybe 300 yards back, illuminated by my taillights. The driver's door was closed now, hanging straight on hinges that had been broken just moments before. And standing beside the truck, barely visible in the red glow of my running lights, was a figure. Too far away to see details, but unmistakably human in shape, standing perfectly still, watching me drive away. I snapped my eyes back to the road ahead, my heart hammering against my ribs. The tunnel stretched out in front of me, the headlights showing nothing but more concrete and darkness, an endless road. I pushed the accelerator down, feeling the engine respond, hearing the turbo spool up as I gained speed. 45 miles per hour, 50, 55. The tunnel walls blurred past, and the darkness stayed constant, never retreating, never revealing an end. The CB radio spoke again, the same voice, the same wrong cadence. You should not have come here, Rylan. This tunnel does not lead out, it only leads deeper. You will understand soon. Everyone does, eventually. I switched off the CB radio, cutting the voice mid-sentence. But even in the silence that followed, I could still hear that low electrical hum, coming from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the tunnel like the mountain itself was breathing. My GPS had stopped working entirely, the screen frozen on a loading symbol that spun endlessly without resolving. The tunnel continued, the walls pressing in, the darkness ahead absolute and hungry. And somewhere behind me, growing closer with each passing second despite my speed, I could hear the sound of another engine, the distinctive rumble of a diesel motor that matched my own exactly, following me deeper into the mountain where no light had reached in 60 years. I kept my foot on the accelerator, pushing the rig up to 60 miles per hour, which was faster than I should have been going in an abandoned tunnel with questionable pavement. But the sound of that other engine behind me was getting louder, closing the distance despite my speed. I could hear it clearly now over the rumble of my own motor, a perfect mirror of my diesel's rhythm, matching me gear for gear, revolution for revolution. My odometer said I had been inside the tunnel for 2 miles, which meant I should be approaching the far end soon. Most tunnels through the Appalachians run between 1 and 3 miles, cutting through a single ridge rather than boring for extended distances. But the darkness ahead showed no sign of ending, no hint of the gray, pre-dawn light that should be waiting on the other side of the mountain. Just more concrete, more shadows, more road disappearing into nothing. The headlights caught something on the right wall, and I eased off the gas slightly to get a better look. It was a maintenance alcove, one of those recessed spaces built into tunnel walls where workers could shelter if they needed to get off the roadway. The alcove was about 6 feet deep and 10 feet wide, with a metal door set into the back wall. The door was partially open, and my lights illuminated a narrow space beyond, some kind of access corridor leading deeper into the mountain. As I passed the alcove, something moved inside it. Just a flicker of motion, there and gone in the fraction of a second it took for my headlights to sweep past. But I saw enough to know it was human-shaped, standing in the shadows just inside the doorway, perfectly still, except for that single moment of movement. The figure did not try to flag me down or call out. It just stood there, watching me pass. I checked my mirrors again. The engine sound behind me had gotten closer, and now I could see headlights in the distance, 2 points of yellowish light that looked exactly like my own high beams. The lights were maybe a quarter-mile back, coming on fast, and as I watched, they grew brighter. Whoever was driving that truck was not slowing down, not maintaining a safe distance, just barreling forward through the tunnel like they were trying to catch me. The CB radio, which I had switched off minutes ago, crackled back to life on its own. The voice returned, that same wrong cadence, those same spaces between words that felt like they were coming from somewhere very far away. You passed the first alcove, Rylan. There are 47 more between here and the end. In each one, you will see someone you know. Someone who drove this tunnel before you. Someone who never left. I reached for the CB to shut it off again, but before I could hit the power button, the voice continued. The truck behind you is yours, Rylan. Same make, same model, same registration. It has been following you since you entered. It has always been following you. It will follow you all the way to the end, and then you will understand. This time, I ripped the power cord out of the CB unit entirely, yanking the cable from the back of the radio and letting it hang loose. But even with the power disconnected, I could still hear that low electrical hum, coming from the speakers, coming from the dashboard, coming from the tunnel walls themselves. The sound was in everything now, a frequency that resonated in my teeth and made the steering wheel vibrate under my hands. At 3 miles inside, according to my odometer, I passed the second alcove. This time, I tried not to look, tried to keep my eyes fixed on the road ahead, but peripheral vision is a cruel thing. I caught the movement again, another figure standing in the shadows, and this time I recognized the shape. It was wearing a trucker's cap and a reflective vest, the kind of outfit I wore every day when I was doing inspections or working around my rig. The figure raised one hand in a slow wave as I passed, and I saw my own face looking back at me from the shadows, my own expression locked in something between recognition and resignation. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, the engine roaring in response, pushing the speedometer past 70. The tunnel walls became a blur of concrete and rust stains. The yellow center line, barely visible under decades of grime, flickered past like a strobe effect. Behind me, those headlights stayed constant, matching my speed exactly, never gaining, never falling back, just maintaining that perfect quarter-mile distance. The pavement started to change at mile 4. The smooth concrete gave way to rougher asphalt, then back to concrete, then to something that looked like it might have been brick at one time. The surface under my wheels changed texture every few hundred yards, and each change brought a different sound, a different vibration through the frame of the truck. Some sections were smooth and quiet, others rattled my teeth, and a few felt like I was driving over corrugated metal even though the surface looked like ordinary pavement. More alcoves appeared, spaced at irregular intervals along both walls. I stopped trying not to look at them. In each one, I saw variations of myself, different versions wearing different clothes, standing at different angles. Some of them waved, some of them just stared. One of them was holding a CB handset up to its mouth, lips moving in words I could not hear, and I realized with a chill that this was the figure making those radio calls, one of my own echoes calling out to me from the shadows. At mile 5, the tunnel widened. The walls pulled back to 3 lanes width, then 4, opening into a space that felt more like an underground cavern than a highway tunnel. The ceiling rose higher, disappearing into darkness above the reach of my headlights. On the left side of the road, I could see what looked like an old service station, a concrete island with rusted pumps, and a small building that might have been an attendance booth. The pumps were ancient, the kind with mechanical number wheels behind glass faces, showing prices in cents per gallon. The service station island was occupied. There were 3 trucks parked at the pumps, all of them facing the same direction I was traveling, all of them with their lights off and their cabs apparently empty. As I drew closer, my headlights illuminated the trucks in detail, and I felt my stomach turn to ice. All 3 trucks were blue Kenworths, same year, same model, same configuration as mine, and all 3 had Pennsylvania plates with numbers that were eerily close to my own registration. I did not slow down. I kept my speed up, steering around the service island and staying in the center lane. But as I passed the first truck, I saw movement inside the cab. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield. The figure turned its head as I passed, tracking my movement, and I caught a glimpse of the face. It was me again, but older, worn down, with eyes that had seen too much and a face that had forgotten how to show emotion. The second truck was the same. Another version of me behind the wheel, this one younger, wearing the clothes I had worn 5 years ago when I first started running these mountain routes. The third truck had someone who looked exactly like I did right now, wearing the same jacket, the same cap, the same expression of confused fear that I could feel on my own face. Past the service island, the tunnel began to narrow again, the walls closing in from 4 lanes back to 2. The ceiling lowered, pressing down until I could almost imagine I felt its weight on top of my trailer. The air inside the cab had gotten colder still, and now I could see ice forming on the inside of my windshield. Frost creeping in from the edges despite the heater running at full blast. At mile 6, I hit a section of standing water. The tunnel floor dipped slightly, creating a low spot where water had collected, probably from seepage through the mountain above. The water was only a few inches deep, but driving through it sent up sheets of spray that crashed against my windshield and momentarily blinded me. When the wipers cleared the glass, I saw that the tunnel ahead had changed. The walls were no longer concrete. They had become rough stone, the original rock face of the mountain, with tool marks still visible where workers had drilled and blasted. This section of the tunnel looked older than the rest, primitive, like I had driven backwards through time into an earlier era of the construction. Support timbers lined the walls, massive wooden beams that had turned black with age, and the ceiling was reinforced with arched ribs of rusted metal. The headlights behind me disappeared. I checked my mirrors and saw only darkness where those pursuing lights had been, as if the truck following me had simply stopped existing. But the engine sound remained, still perfectly synchronized with my own motor, still coming from somewhere behind me in the tunnel. I could hear it clearly, a diesel rumble that seemed to come from the walls themselves now, resonating through the stone. More alcoves passed by, and in each one I saw variations on a theme. Myself in different situations, different states. One version was slumped against the alcove wall, clearly exhausted or injured. Another was pacing back and forth in the small space, hands gesturing like he was arguing with someone I could not see. A third was standing perfectly still, arms at his sides, staring directly at me as I passed, and I noticed with horror that this version was not breathing. His chest perfectly motionless, his eyes reflecting my headlights like an animal's eyes caught in the dark. The CB radio, still unplugged, crackled with life again. But this time, it was not the strange voice with the wrong cadence. It was my own voice calling out from the speakers. "Rylan, this is Rylan. Mile 46 bore is a loop. There is no exit. The tunnel curves and you have been driving in a circle. Check your fuel gauge." I looked at my fuel gauge and felt panic surge through my chest. I had started the night with 3/4 of a tank, enough for the entire trip to Wheeling with fuel to spare. But now the needle was sitting just above a 1/4 tank. I had burned through half my fuel driving through this tunnel, which should have been impossible. At the speed I was traveling, I should have gone 150 miles or more, but my odometer insisted I had only covered 6 miles since entering the tunnel. The road began to climb, tilting upward at a slight grade that I could feel in the engine's response. The tunnel curved to the right, a gentle arc that suggested I was following the contour of the mountain ridge. The walls closed in tighter, until my mirrors were only a foot from the concrete on either side. I had to slow down, dropping to 40 miles per hour, then 30, as the clearance got narrower and narrower. At what my odometer said was mile 7, I saw the crash. A truck had jackknifed across both lanes, the trailer angled sideways and the tractor unit pushed up against the right wall. The truck was old, older than the ones I had seen at the service island, maybe from the 50s or 60s based on the rounded cab design and the faded paint scheme. The trailer doors were open, hanging loose on broken hinges, and the cargo had spilled across the roadway. Wooden crates and metal drums lay scattered everywhere, many of them broken open, their contents long since gone to rust and rot. I stopped. There was no way around the wreck, no clearance to squeeze past, no room to turn around. I sat there with my engine idling, staring at the jackknifed truck, trying to figure out what to do. Behind me, I could hear that other engine getting closer again, the sound growing louder. And when I checked my mirrors, I saw those headlights returning, 2 points of yellowish light that were maybe 1/8 of a mile back and closing fast. The CB radio spoke with my own voice. "Get out, Rylan. You have to move the wreck. It is the only way forward. Get out of your truck and move the cargo. Clear a path. You have 5 minutes before the other truck catches you." Every survival instinct I had told me not to leave my cab. The truck was my safe space, my metal shell, the only thing between me and whatever was happening in this tunnel. But the headlights behind me were getting brighter, and the engine sound was getting louder, and I could see now that if that truck did not stop, if it just kept coming at the speed it was traveling, it would crash into my trailer and probably kill me on impact. I pulled on my work gloves and grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket. The air that rushed in when I opened the cab door was so cold it burned my lungs, far colder than it should have been this deep inside a mountain. My breath came out in great white clouds, and I could feel the moisture in my nose freezing. The tunnel was silent except for my idling engine and that approaching diesel rumble from behind. I climbed down from the cab and my boots hit concrete that was slick with something that was not quite water and not quite ice. The surface had a greasy quality that made walking difficult, and when I shined my flashlight down I could see patterns in the slickness, almost like tire tracks, but wrong somehow, the treads going in directions that did not match any kind of vehicle movement. The cargo spilled from the wrecked truck was unidentifiable. What had once been wooden crates had deteriorated into piles of rotted boards and rusted metal bands. The drums had corroded through, their contents reduced to crusted stains on the tunnel floor. I started dragging the debris to the sides of the tunnel, working as fast as I could, acutely aware of those headlights getting brighter behind me and the sound of that engine getting closer. As I cleared a path, I noticed something about the wrecked truck. The cab door was open, hanging at an angle, and I could see into the interior. There was no skeleton, no remains, no sign that a driver had ever been there. But on the seat, perfectly preserved despite the decades of apparent abandonment, was a thermos of coffee and a handwritten logbook. The logbook was open to a page dated November 18, 1962, the year the tunnel had been officially closed. The last entry, written in careful script, said, "Mile 7, engine trouble. Going to walk back for help. If anyone finds this, do not stay in the tunnel after dark. They come out of the alcoves when the sun goes down." The headlights behind me were close now, maybe 200 yards away and coming fast. I could see the outline of the truck, the same blue Kenworth, the same configuration, driving with no one visible in the cab. The truck was accelerating, building speed, aimed directly at my rig like a guided missile. I dropped the piece of cargo I was holding and ran back to my cab, slipping on the greasy concrete, scrambling up into the driver's seat and slamming the door. I threw the transmission into gear and hit the accelerator, threading my truck through the narrow gap I had cleared, inches of clearance on either side, my mirrors scraping against the cargo I had not had time to move. In my rearview mirror, I watched the pursuing truck reach the wreck site. It did not slow down. It did not try to avoid the obstruction. It just drove straight into the jackknifed trailer at full speed, and the sound of the impact was like thunder, echoing through the tunnel, reverberating off the walls. But when I looked back a second later, expecting to see twisted metal and scattered cargo, I saw nothing. The pursuing truck was gone, the wreck was gone, and the tunnel behind me was empty and dark, as if nothing had ever been there at all. The CB radio spoke again, my own voice, tired now, resigned. "Mile 8 is coming. That is where the tunnel splits. You will have to choose, left or right. Both ways look the same. Both ways lead deeper. Choose wrong, and you will loop back to the beginning. Choose right, and you might find something worse than a loop. Choose carefully, Rylan. Everyone who has come this far had to choose. Most of them are still here." Ahead in my headlights, I could see the tunnel splitting into two branches, a Y intersection where the road divided and disappeared into separate passages through the mountain. Both tunnels looked identical. Same width, same concrete walls, same darkness waiting beyond the reach of my lights. There were no signs, no markers, no indication of which way might lead to an exit and which way might lead to another loop, or worse. My fuel gauge had dropped to just under a quarter tank. If I chose wrong, if I drove another 7 or 8 miles and ended up back at the beginning, I would not have enough fuel to try again. I would be stranded in this tunnel, another abandoned truck waiting in an alcove for the next driver to pass, another echo calling out on the CB radio, another warning that would not be heeded. The split was 50 yards ahead. I had seconds to choose. Behind me, the sound of that other engine had returned, building again from silence, starting the cycle over. The hunt was beginning again, and I was running out of road, running out of fuel, running out of time to find a way out of mile 46-4 before I became just another version of myself standing in an alcove, watching the next Rylan Mercier drive past into the dark. I had 30 yards to make a decision that might determine whether I ever saw daylight again. The split in the tunnel rushed toward me, the two passages yawning open like the jaws of some massive predator. Left tunnel, right tunnel, both identical in every visible detail. Same width, same lighting fixtures hanging dead from the ceiling, same water stains on the concrete, same darkness waiting beyond. My hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. I eased off the accelerator, letting the rig slow to 20 miles per hour, then 15, trying to buy myself a few more seconds to think. But what was there to think about? I had no information, no logic to apply, no reason to choose one direction over the other. It was a coin flip, except the stakes were my life and possibly my sanity. At 20 yards from the split, I saw something that made my decision for me. On the wall of the right tunnel, just visible in my headlights, someone had scratched words into the concrete. The letters were crude and deep, carved with something metal, probably a knife or a screwdriver. The message said, "Right EOS loop, left eco forward. Trust me, RM, RM, Rylan Mercier," my own initials. One of the versions of myself that I had seen standing in those alcoves had apparently made it this far, had figured out which way led forward, and had left a message for the next iteration of me that came through. Or it was a trap, a lie carved into stone by something that wanted me to choose left, wanted me to drive deeper into whatever waited in that direction. 10 yards. I had to choose now. The engine behind me was getting louder, building toward that crescendo that meant the pursuing truck would soon come into view. I thought about the logbook I had seen in the wrecked truck. The entry from 1962, warning about things that come out of the alcoves after dark. I thought about all the versions of myself I had seen, all the echoes standing in the shadows, watching me pass. If one of them had left this message, maybe they were trying to help. Maybe some part of me that had already been through this nightmare was trying to save the current version from making the wrong choice. I yanked the wheel left and committed to the turn. The trailer swung wide, the rear wheels tracking close to the center divider between the two tunnels. For a moment I thought I had misjudged the clearance, thought I would clip the concrete island and jackknife just like that truck back at mile 7. But the wheels cleared with inches to spare, and then I was fully in the left tunnel, accelerating again, putting distance between myself and the split. In my mirror, I watched the intersection recede. The pursuing truck burst into view just as I rounded a slight curve that took the split out of sight. The truck was going at least 70 miles per hour, coming on like a freight train, and I saw it veer right at the split without slowing, choosing the opposite direction from me. The sound of its engine faded quickly, Doppler shifting away as it raced down the right tunnel toward whatever waited there. The CB radio crackled, and a different voice came through this time. Not my own voice, not that wrong cadence stranger, but someone else entirely. The voice was female, middle-aged, with a hint of West Virginia mountain accent. "Good choice on the left tunnel, sugar. That's the way forward. But forward don't mean out. You got another 6 miles before you see anything different, and those 6 miles are going to feel like 60. I grabbed the handset, forgetting that I had ripped the power cord out. But the radio was working anyway, powered by something other than the electrical system of my truck. "Who are you?" I asked. "How many people are trapped in here?" The woman's voice came back immediately. Name was Deputy Cole Branford, Pennsylvania State Police. Been in this tunnel since 1959. As for how many people, well, that depends on how you count. There's maybe 30 or 40 trucks in here that I know about, scattered through the miles. But there's hundreds of us, maybe thousands, if you count all the versions. Every time someone comes through, they leave pieces of themselves behind. Echoes, copies, whatever you want to call them. The tunnel collects us. "Branford," I said, my mind racing. "That's not a woman's name. You said Deputy Cole Branford." A pause, then something that might have been a laugh. "Did I say Cole? I meant Maeve. Maeve Huxley. I get confused sometimes. Been down here so long the details start to blur. Sometimes I forget which name I had before I came in here. Point is, you made the right choice. Left tunnel leads to mile 14, and that's where things change." The tunnel had begun to slope downward, descending deeper into the mountain. The grade was slight but noticeable, maybe 3 or 4 degrees, enough that I had to tap the brakes occasionally to keep my speed under control. The walls here were different from the earlier sections, lined with white ceramic tiles like an old subway station. Many of the tiles had fallen off, leaving dark rectangular gaps that looked like missing teeth in a rotted smile. At what my odometer claimed was mile 9, I passed another maintenance alcove. This time I did not see myself standing in the shadows. Instead, I saw a woman in a highway patrol uniform standing at attention with her hands behind her back. As my headlights swept across her, she snapped a salute, the gesture crisp and formal. Her face was too far away to see clearly, but I could make out enough detail to see that she was smiling, and the smile was not friendly. "That's me you just passed," the voice on the CB said. Or one of me, anyway. I got 47 copies of myself scattered through this tunnel, one in every alcove from here to mile 14. We all remember the day I drove in here chasing a speeder who ran into the tunnel to avoid a ticket. I followed him in, and neither of us ever came back out. My patrol car is parked at mile 11. You'll see it when you get there. "What's at mile 14? I asked. "You said that's where things change." "The pumping station," Maeve said. "That's where the tunnel breathes. You'll understand when you get there. Just keep driving, keep your speed steady, and whatever you do, don't stop if you see someone waving at you from the roadway. The echoes that walk around outside the alcoves, they're the dangerous ones. They're the versions of us that forgot they were echoes and think they're still alive. They'll try to get you to stop, try to get you to help them, and if you do, they'll pull you out of your truck and take your place. That's how the tunnel grows. Every time someone stops, there's one more echo walking around, one more person trapped." Mile 10 brought a stretch of tunnel that was flooded with water, not just standing water on the floor like I had seen earlier, but deep water that covered the roadway to a depth of at least 2 feet. I could see the surface rippling in my headlights, and I could hear the sound of my tires churning through it, throwing up waves that crashed against the walls. The water was cold enough that I could see my breath fogging even thicker inside the cab, and ice was forming on every metal surface. Something moved under the water as I drove through. I saw the surface disturb, saw a shape gliding just below the visibility line, pacing my truck. It was too large to be a fish, too fluid in its movement to be debris. The shape kept pace with me for maybe 50 yards, then vanished, diving deeper or sliding away into some submerged opening in the tunnel wall. "Don't think about what's in the water," Maeve said over the CB. "That's one of the things the tunnel makes. It takes all the fear and all the wrong choices and all the bad endings, and it grows things from them. Things that don't have names because they never existed outside this place. Just keep moving." At mile 11, I saw the patrol car. It was pulled over on the right shoulder. A black and white Pennsylvania State Police cruiser from the late 50s, complete with a single rotating beacon on the roof and the old-style star badge painted on the door. The car was in perfect condition. No rust, no dust, looking like it had been parked there yesterday instead of 60-some years ago. The driver's door was open, and the interior light was on, illuminating an empty seat and a clipboard lying on the dashboard. A figure stood beside the car, and for a moment I thought it was another alcove echo. But this figure was standing in the roadway, right in my lane, waving both arms over her head in the universal signal for distress. As I got closer, I could see it was a woman in a highway patrol uniform, and she was shouting something I could not hear over the engine noise. "That's another me," Maeve said on the CB. "That's the me that thinks she can still flag down help, still thinks someone will stop and give her a ride out of here. Don't slow down, don't make eye contact, just drive past her like she's not there." I kept my speed steady at 40 miles per hour. The figure in the roadway did not move as I approached. She just stood there waving, shouting, and as I got close enough to see her face clearly, I saw the desperation in her eyes, the absolute certainty that I would stop and help her. When it became clear that I was not slowing down, her expression changed from hopeful to angry, and she stepped aside at the last possible second, letting me pass. In my mirror, I watched her recede. She had turned to face my direction, and she was running after my truck now, sprinting at a speed that no human should be able to maintain. She was gaining on me, closing the distance despite my 40-mile-per-hour pace, and I could see her mouth moving, forming words that I was glad I could not hear. I pushed the accelerator down, bringing my speed up to 50, then 60. The running figure fell behind, unable to match the increased pace, and eventually she disappeared from my mirrors, swallowed by the darkness behind me. But I could still hear her on the CB radio, breathing hard, gasping between words. "You should have stopped. You should have helped me. Now I'll have to wait for the next one. I'll have to wait here until someone else comes through. Do you know how long the waits are between trucks? Do you know what it's like to stand in this tunnel for months, for years, waiting for headlights to appear?" I switched the CB to a different channel, but her voice followed me, bleeding through on every frequency. Channel 19, Channel 17, Channel 9, all of them carried the same desperate gasping pleas. I turned the volume all the way down, but I could still hear her, the sound coming from the speaker even with no power, even with the volume knob twisted to 0. Mile 12 was marked by a change in the tunnel's atmosphere. The air became thicker, harder to breathe, like the oxygen content had dropped. My engine started to run rough, coughing and sputtering, and I had to downshift to maintain speed. The walls were closing in again, narrowing from 2 lanes to 1.5, and the ceiling was lowering until I could almost feel it pressing down on top of my trailer. The alcoves here were occupied by figures I did not recognize, not versions of myself, not Maeve in her patrol uniform, but strangers. Men and women in clothes from different eras, standing in the shadows with their faces turned toward the road, watching me pass. One alcove held a man in a business suit from the 40s, his hair slicked back, his tie perfectly knotted. Another held a woman in a waitress uniform from a roadside diner, her apron still white despite the decades. A third held a young man in a military uniform, army greens with corporal stripes looking like he had just stepped out of a World War II recruiting poster. "Those are the passengers," Maeve said, her voice cutting through the static. "The people who were riding with the drivers when they came in. The tunnel takes everyone. Drivers, passengers, hitchhikers, stowaways. Everyone leaves an echo." At mile 13, my fuel gauge hit the red zone. The low fuel warning light came on, a bright orange icon that felt like a countdown timer. I had maybe 20 miles of range left, maybe less if I had to keep driving at high speed. If Maeve was right about mile 14 being where things changed, I needed to get there soon, before my diesel ran out and I became another abandoned truck waiting in the darkness. The tunnel began to widen again, opening into a large chamber that felt more like an underground parking garage than a highway tunnel. The ceiling rose to at least 50 feet above the roadway, supported by massive concrete pillars that marched away into the shadows. Between the pillars I could see other vehicles, cars, trucks, buses, motorcycles, all of them parked at odd angles, all of them dark and apparently abandoned. And then I saw the pumping station. It was built into the far wall of the chamber, a huge industrial structure with pipes and valves and machinery that looked like it belonged in a power plant or a water treatment facility. The machinery was running, pistons moving, pumps cycling, valves opening and closing in a rhythm that I could feel through the floor of my truck. The sound was immense, a deep, thrumming pulse that made the air vibrate and set up sympathetic vibrations in my body. The road led directly toward the pumping station, threading between the parked vehicles and the concrete pillars. I could see an opening on the far side of the machinery, another tunnel entrance that presumably led forward to mile 15 and beyond. But between me and that opening, standing in the roadway directly in front of the pumping station, was a figure. It was me, not an echo in an alcove, not a distant version glimpsed in mirrors, but me standing in the road, wearing the exact same clothes I was wearing right now, down to the stitching on my jacket. The figure raised one hand in a stopping gesture, palm out, and I could see my own face clearly in my headlights. The expression was calm, almost peaceful, completely different from the fear and confusion I knew was showing on my real face. "That's the choice point," Maeve said over the CB. "That's where you decide if you're going to keep being you, or if you're going to become something else. The you standing in the road is the version that gave up, that accepted the tunnel, that stopped trying to get out. If you hit him, if you drive right through him, you keep moving forward, but you'll carry him with you. You'll have killed a version of yourself, and that's a weight that most people can't bear." "What if I stop?" I asked. "What if I try to talk to him?" "Then he gets in your truck, and you become him. You swap places. He drives out, and you stand in the road waiting for the next version to come through. That's how the tunnel works. It offers you a way out, but someone has to stay behind. Someone always has to stay behind." The figure in the road had not moved. He was just standing there, waiting, watching me approach with his eyes that were my eyes, with a face that was my face, with hands that I knew were identical to my own, down to the scars and calluses from 12 years of driving truck. Behind him, the pumping station pulsed and throbbed, the machinery breathing in and out, and I understood finally what Maeve had meant. The tunnel was alive, it was breathing, and every person trapped inside was part of that breath, part of the rhythm, part of the thing that kept this impossible place existing between the miles. I was 50 yards from the figure. My fuel light was glowing brighter, more insistent. Behind me, I could hear that other engine sound returning, the pursuing truck building up speed again, coming for another pass. I had seconds to decide, stop and trade places, let him drive my truck out while I stayed behind to wait for the next Ryland Mercier, or drive forward, drive through him, kill a version of myself and carry that weight for whatever remained of my life. The steering wheel was slick under my sweating palms. The figure in the road lowered his hand, no longer signaling me to stop. Instead, he folded his arms across his chest and smiled, and the smile was sad and knowing and accepting. He was giving me permission. He was telling me it was okay to choose, whatever I chose. He had already made his peace with being the echo, with being the version that stayed behind. I pressed down on the accelerator. The engine responded with a surge of power, and the truck leaped forward, closing the distance. 40 yards, 30 yards, 20 yards. The figure did not move, did not try to get out of the way. He just stood there watching me come, that sad smile still on his face, and at 10 yards I closed my eyes because I could not watch myself die even if the version dying was not quite real, not quite me. Just an echo that the tunnel had made from my fear and my desperation. The impact never came. I felt nothing, no thud of collision, no resistance from hitting a body. When I opened my eyes a second later, the figure was gone, and I was through the opening on the far side of the pumping station, entering mile 15 with my fuel gauge sitting just above empty and the sound of machinery fading behind me. The CB radio spoke in my own voice, calm and peaceful. "You made it through. Most people don't. Most people stop and trade places, but you kept going, and now you're past the choice point. Mile 15 to mile 20 is the last stretch. That's where the tunnel decides if it's going to let you out or keep you forever. Good luck, Rylan. You're going to need it. The tunnel ahead was completely dark, my headlights barely penetrating the blackness. And somewhere in that darkness I could hear voices, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all calling out my name in unison, beckoning me forward into the final miles of Mile 46. Bore. Mile 15 began in absolute darkness, the kind of black that swallows light rather than simply reflecting none. My headlights seemed to bend around something in the air, curving away from the road ahead, leaving only a dim, gray glow that barely illuminated 10 feet in front of my bumper. I had to slow to 20 miles per hour just to see where the road was going, and even then I was driving mostly by feel, sensing the walls on either side more than seeing them. The voices I had heard were clearer now. They were not calling my name anymore. Instead, they were reciting things I had said, conversations I had had, thoughts I had kept private. I heard my own voice telling my daughter I would be home for her birthday 3 years ago, a promise I had broken because of a delayed load. I heard myself arguing with my dispatcher about pay rates. I heard the private words I had spoken to my wife on the phone last week, telling her I was tired of the road, tired of the loneliness, thinking about finding a local job that would let me sleep in my own bed every night. The tunnel was playing back my life, pulling memories out of my head and broadcasting them through unseen speakers. Every regret, every broken promise, every moment of weakness or doubt or fear. The voices overlapped, creating a cacophony that made it hard to think, hard to focus on the simple task of keeping the truck between the lines. At mile 16, the road surface changed to something that felt like metal under my tires. The sound was different, a hollow ringing with each rotation of the wheels, and I could feel vibrations coming up through the frame that had nothing to do with the engine or the drivetrain. The vibrations matched the rhythm of the pumping station I had passed, that same deep pulse, and I realized I was driving on the skin of something, the surface of whatever machinery kept this tunnel breathing. The fuel gauge needle was touching empty now, bouncing against the peg with each bump in the road. The low fuel warning light had stopped blinking and gone solid, and I could feel the engine starting to surge as it sucked the last drops from the tank. Maybe 5 miles of range left, maybe less. I was in a race between my remaining fuel and the end of the tunnel, and I had no idea which would run out first. More alcoves appeared, but these were different from the earlier ones. The figures standing in them were not still anymore. They were moving, pacing, gesturing, calling out words I could not quite hear. Some of them were trying to climb out of the alcoves, pulling themselves up onto the roadway, and I had to swerve around them, dodging bodies that may or may not have been solid, may or may not have been real. One figure made it fully onto the road before I reached him. It was an old man in coveralls and a plaid shirt, the kind of outfit a farmer or a mill worker might wear. He stood in my lane with his hand up, palm out, and his mouth was moving rapidly. As I got closer, I could hear what he was saying, the same phrase repeated over and over. "It won't let you out. It won't let you out. It won't let you out." I swerved around him, my trailer wheels passing within inches of where he stood. In my mirror, I saw him turn to watch me pass, still repeating that phrase, his hand still raised in warning or farewell. Then he stepped back into an alcove and vanished into the shadows like he had never been there at all. The CB radio crackled with Maeve's voice again, but now she sounded different. The West Virginia accent was gone, replaced by something flatter, more mechanical. Mile 17 is where most people run out of fuel. That's by design. The tunnel measures how much diesel you have when you enter, and it adjusts the distance to make sure you run dry right around here. When your engine dies, you have 2 choices: walk forward in the dark, or wait in your truck for the echo collectors to find you. What are echo collectors? I asked, my voice hoarse from breathing the cold, thick air. The things that maintain the tunnel. The things that gather up the new echoes and place them in alcoves. Nobody's ever seen one clearly. They stay in the dark parts, in the spaces between the lights, but everyone who runs out of fuel eventually meets them. That's when you become permanent. That's when you stop being a person trapped in the tunnel and start being a part of the tunnel itself. My engine coughed, stuttered, caught again. The fuel pump was pulling vapor now, pulling the last fumes from a tank that had somehow held 40 gallons when I entered and now held nothing. I downshifted, trying to maintain momentum, trying to squeeze every last yard out of the remaining fuel. The speedometer dropped to 15 miles per hour, then 10, then 5. At mile 18, I saw the other trucks. There were dozens of them, parked along both sides of the tunnel in a silent convoy that stretched as far as my dying headlights could show. Every truck was a big rig, tractor-trailers of different makes and models from different eras. Some looked new, their paint still glossy, their chrome still bright. Others were decades old, showing rust and decay, but all of them had one thing in common. They were all blue Kenworths, or Peterbilts, or Freightliners. All of them the same basic configuration as mine. Like the tunnel had a preference, a pattern it followed when choosing which trucks to swallow. Figures moved between the trucks, walking up and down the line, checking door handles, peering into windows. Some of them were wearing trucker gear, jeans and flannel shirts and ball caps with company logos. Others wore different clothes, business suits and dresses and military uniforms. But all of them moved with the same shuffling gait, the same mechanical purposefulness, like they were following a script they had performed 1,000 times before. My engine died. The sound that had been my constant companion since entering the tunnel 12 years ago simply stopped, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. The dashboard lights flickered once, twice, then went dark. The heater shut off. The only light remaining was the pale glow of the battery-powered emergency lamp mounted above my sleeper berth. I sat in the sudden quiet, listening to my own breathing, feeling my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the windshield, I could see those figures still moving between the parked trucks, and now some of them had stopped and turned to face my direction. They knew I had stopped. They knew my engine was dead. They were starting to move toward me, not hurrying, just walking with that same steady shuffle, converging on my truck like moths drawn to the last light in a dying world. The CB radio spoke one more time, and this time I recognized the voice immediately. It was my own, but older, worn down, exhausted beyond anything I had ever felt. Get out and walk, Rielan. You've got maybe 2 miles to the actual exit. It's still there, still real, still leads out to Route 60 about 10 miles south of where you entered. But you have to walk. You have to leave your truck behind. And you can't look back. Whatever you hear behind you, whatever calls your name, whatever sounds like someone you know, you can't look back. That's the last test. That's how the tunnel knows if you're strong enough to leave. I grabbed my flashlight, my wallet, my phone that had stopped working miles ago. I left everything else, all my personal items, the logbook, the paperwork for the load I would never deliver. I opened the driver's door and dropped down to the pavement, my legs shaking from adrenaline and fear, my boots hitting concrete that felt wrong, too soft, too warm, like I was standing on skin rather than stone. The figures were closer now, maybe 50 yards away, close enough that I could see their faces in the glow of my flashlight. I recognized some of them. The old man in coveralls who had warned me the tunnel would not let me out. The woman in the waitress uniform I had seen in an alcove earlier. The young soldier in his World War II greens. And others, dozens of others, all of them converging on my position with empty eyes and reaching hands. I ran, not toward the figures but past them, threading between the parked trucks heading in the direction my odometer had said was forward. My flashlight beam bounced and swayed, showing glimpses of more vehicles, more alcoves, more figures standing or sitting or lying in the shadows. The tunnel floor was covered with that same greasy substance I had felt at mile 7, making every step treacherous, but I kept my balance and kept moving. Behind me, I heard my truck door slam shut. I heard the engine start, that familiar diesel rumble that I had lived with for 12 years, and I heard the transmission engage. Someone, or something, had gotten into my cab and was driving my truck, probably adding it to the collection of vehicles parked along the tunnel walls. But I followed the rule. I did not look back. Mile 19 was marked by a change in the tunnel's structure. The walls became rougher, less finished, more like a cave than a constructed passage. The ceiling lowered until I had to duck my head in places and the floor became uneven, forcing me to watch my footing. Water dripped from above, cold drops that stung when they hit my neck and face. The air smelled like wet stone and something organic, something rotting. The voices behind me were calling my name now, using tones I recognized. My wife's voice, my daughter's voice, my mother's voice, who had been dead for 5 years. They were calling me to stop, to wait, to come back and help them. They said they were trapped. They said they needed me. They said if I just turned around they could all leave together. But I kept walking, kept my eyes forward, kept my flashlight pointed ahead, even as the beam grew dimmer and started to flicker. At mile 20, I saw light. Real light. Not the artificial glow of emergency lamps or the dim phosphorescence that seemed to come from the tunnel walls themselves, but honest daylight, gray and weak, filtered through rain or fog, but unmistakably sunlight. The tunnel was ending. The passage was narrowing to a point, and beyond that point I could see a roughly circular opening, maybe 8 feet across, with pale morning light visible beyond. I stumbled forward, my legs burning, my lungs aching from breathing the thick air. The opening was 100 yards away, then 50, then 20. I could see trees beyond the exit, bare November branches, and I could see rain falling, normal, cold Pennsylvania rain. I could smell it, that clean smell of rain on dead leaves, so different from the stale underground air I had been breathing. 10 yards from the exit, I heard a sound that made me freeze. It was the distinctive air brake hiss of a truck stopping, and it was coming from behind me, close behind me. I heard a door open, heard boots hitting pavement, heard footsteps approaching. And then I heard my own voice, the same exhausted tone from the CB radio, speaking from just a few feet behind me. "Don't go out there, Rylan. It's not real. The tunnel shows you an exit, but it's just another loop. If you go through, you'll end up back at the entrance, back at mile 0, and you'll have to drive through again. I've done it 6 times. Each time, I thought I was finally getting out. Each time, I ended up back at the beginning. The only way to really leave is to stop trying. Accept that you're here. Accept that you're home. This is where you belong now." Every fiber of my being wanted to turn around, wanted to see if that really was me standing behind me, wanted to verify the source of that voice. But I remembered the rule. Do not look back. Whatever you hear, whatever calls your name, do not look back. I took a step forward, then another. My eyes locked on that circle of gray daylight ahead. The voice behind me became urgent, almost panicked. "Rylan, stop. I'm you. I'm the real you. You're the echo. You're the version that thinks it's real, but you're not. If you go through that opening, you'll cease to exist. I'm trying to save you." 5 yards to the exit. I could feel the temperature changing. Could feel real cold air flowing in from outside, pushing back against the warm, sick air of the tunnel. I could hear the rain more clearly now, that soft patter on leaves and earth that meant I was about to leave this underground nightmare. The footsteps behind me broke into a run. "Don't do it! Don't go through!" I lunged forward, diving through the opening, tucking my shoulders and rolling as I hit wet grass on the other side. I came up on my knees in the rain, gasping, and spun around to look at the tunnel entrance I had just exited. There was nothing there. No tunnel mouth, no opening in the mountain, no trace of the passage I had just walked through. I was kneeling in the middle of a forest, surrounded by bare trees and underbrush, with rain soaking through my clothes. Behind me was only more forest, the hillside unbroken by any kind of man-made structure. I stood on shaking legs and turned in a circle, trying to orient myself. The forest looked wrong somehow, the trees too close together, the undergrowth too thick. And in the distance, through the rain and the bare branches, I could see a road, a paved road with faded lane markings, climbing up into the hills. I walked towards the road, pushing through the brush, my wet clothes clinging to my skin. When I reached the pavement, I looked both ways and felt my stomach drop. To my right, the road curved away and disappeared into the forest. To my left, maybe a quarter-mile distant, I could see a structure, a massive, concrete arch built into the side of the mountain, with carved letters that were just barely visible through the rain. I walked closer, already knowing what I would see, already feeling the sick certainty settling into my gut. The letters above the arch spelled out Mile 46 Bore, 1938, and underneath, in smaller text, Abandoned, 1962, no entry. I was standing at the entrance to the tunnel, the same entrance I had driven through hours ago, or days ago, or years ago. Time had no meaning in this place. The tunnel had spit me out exactly where I had entered, completing the loop, proving that the voice behind me had been right. There was no exit. There was only the endless cycle, the eternal return, the road that led forever into the mountain and emerged nowhere at all. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out with numb fingers and saw that I had service now, full bars, and a notification showing a text message from my dispatcher. The message was time-stamped 11:47 p.m., the exact time he had sent me the original load offer. The message said, "Got a hot load for you if you want it. Industrial piping, Pittsburgh to Wheeling. Good rate. Straight shot down Backbone Ridge Highway. You interested?" I looked at the tunnel entrance, at the dark opening waiting in the mountain. Somewhere inside, I knew my blue Kenworth was parked among the others, my name still on the registration, my logbook still showing the entry from tonight or last night or whenever it had been when I drove in. Somewhere inside, there was an alcove with my name on it, waiting for my echo to take its place in the shadows. And somewhere, on a dark highway in western Pennsylvania, another Rylan Mercier was getting a text message from his dispatcher, seeing a job offer that paid well, starting his truck and heading toward a road he had never heard of. Backbone Ridge Highway, Mile 0. An alternate route that promised to save time, promised to get him to his destination faster, promised nothing but an easy drive through the mountains. I put my phone back in my pocket. The rain was getting heavier, and the temperature was dropping. I needed to find shelter, needed to figure out where I was and how to get back to civilization. But first, I walked up to the tunnel entrance and stood looking into the darkness. I could hear that sound again, that low electrical hum, the breathing of the mountain. And I could hear voices faint and distant, calling out from somewhere deep inside. One of those voices was mine, one of those echoes standing in an alcove, waiting in the shadows, watching for headlights to appear in the distance. One of those versions of me had stayed behind so that this version could walk out into the rain. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe the version in the tunnel was the real me, and the one standing here in the rain was just an echo, a copy that the mountain had made, a false memory of escape that would fade and disappear as soon as I walked far enough away. I turned and started walking down the road, away from the tunnel, following the faded pavement as it curved through the forest. Behind me, I heard the sound of an engine starting, that familiar diesel rumble, and I heard the hiss of air brakes releasing. I did not look back. I just kept walking, following the road wherever it led, while the rain fell harder and the darkness gathered in the trees, and somewhere in the mountain behind me, mile 46, Boar breathed in and waited for the next truck to arrive. My name is Harlan Yates, and I have been hauling freight through the Colorado Rockies for 16 years. I know these mountains better than most people know their own neighborhoods. I know which passes close first when the snow starts, which truck stops have the best coffee at 3 in the morning, and which stretches of highway turn into skating rinks when the temperature drops below freezing. What I did not know, until a February night 2 years ago, was that some tunnels in these mountains are not maintained by any transportation department, and the things that do maintain them have been working in the dark for far longer than any road has existed. The run started normal enough. I picked up a load of mining equipment in Grand Junction, bound for operation outside of Leadville. Heavy machinery, drill components, ventilation systems, the kind of cargo that pays well because it is awkward and difficult to secure properly. The route was straightforward. Highway 70 east through Glenwood Canyon, then south on 91 through the high country. Winter driving in Colorado, but nothing I had not done 100 times before. I left Grand Junction at sunset, watching the last orange light fade from the canyon walls as I climbed into the mountains. The weather report had called for clear skies and cold temperatures, maybe dropping to 10 below zero by midnight. No snow, no ice, just the kind of dry cold that makes your breath crystallize the moment it leaves your lungs. Perfect conditions for a night drive through the high country. The first 2 hours went smooth. Traffic was light, just a few passenger cars and the occasional truck heading the opposite direction. The canyon walls rose up on either side, dark stone striped with snow, and the Colorado River ran alongside the highway, black water churning over rocks that looked like they had been there since the beginning of time. My headlights picked out mile markers and reflectors, and the engine hummed steady, pulling the heavy load up the long grades without complaint. Around 9 p.m., just past Vail, my CB radio crackled with a Colorado State Patrol announcement. Attention, all commercial vehicles. Highway 91 South is closed at Fremont Pass due to avalanche danger. Repeat, 91 is closed. All trucks are being diverted to the Mosquito Range maintenance route. Follow posted detour signs starting at Copper Mountain. I keyed my handset. This is Harlan Yates southbound toward Leadville. What's the condition on the maintenance route? I've never run it before. A different voice came back, deeper, with a mountain drawl. Maintenance route is clear and plowed. Single lane most of the way, so watch for oncoming traffic. It adds about 20 miles, but it'll get you where you're going. Look for the detour signs at mile marker 195. The detour sign appeared right where promised. A bright orange diamond with black lettering directing trucks to exit right. The off-ramp led to a 2-lane road that immediately started climbing higher into the mountains, switchbacking up slopes that I knew would be suicide in bad weather. But tonight the pavement was dry and the stars were so bright they cast shadows, so I shifted down and let the rig find its rhythm on the winding road. After about 10 miles, the road crested a ridge and started descending into a valley I did not recognize. The landscape here was different from the usual Colorado high country. The trees were thicker, older, and the snow lay deeper in the shadows between them. There were no signs of civilization, no power lines, no distant lights from ranch houses or ski resorts. Just wilderness, dark and empty, with the road cutting through it like a scar. The CB radio crackled again, but this time the voice was broken up by static. Maintenance portal at mile marker 12, single lane through. No stopping inside. Repeat, no stopping. The transmission cut off before I could respond, leaving only white noise and that low hum I had started to notice underneath all radio frequencies in these mountains. Mile marker 12 appeared after another 15 minutes of winding descent. The marker was old, a wooden post with faded paint, and next to it stood a larger sign that I had to slow down to read in my headlights. Echo Maintenance Portal, built 1952, single lane, 2.4 miles, headlights required. Emergency parking bay at 1.2 miles. The tunnel entrance was cut into the side of the mountain, a rough rectangular opening about 15 feet high and 12 feet wide. The portal was framed with timbers that looked like they had been there since the 50s. Massive beams dark with age and mineral stains. Above the entrance, carved into the rock, were the words Echo Portal and a date, 1952-1962. I slowed to a crawl, studying the entrance. Something about those dates bothered me. Built in 1952, but the end date was 1962, which suggested the tunnel had only been in active use for 10 years before being converted to a maintenance route. That was unusual. Most tunnels built in that era were designed for decades of heavy use, not a short 10-year lifespan. The pavement leading into the tunnel was in better condition than I expected. Fresh asphalt, relatively new, with clear lane markings and reflectors embedded in the surface. But the walls inside were rough stone, unfinished, with water seeping from cracks and forming icicles that hung like teeth from the ceiling. My headlights showed about 100 feet of passage before the tunnel curved slightly to the right and disappeared into darkness. I checked my mirrors, confirming there was no traffic behind me, and eased forward into the tunnel. The temperature inside the cab dropped immediately, my breath fogging despite the heater running full blast. The engine sound changed too, becoming muffled and strange, like I was driving through a space much larger than the visible dimensions suggested. The first quarter mile was uneventful. The tunnel was straight, the walls steady, the ceiling high enough that I never worried about clearance. Every few hundred feet, there were old light fixtures mounted on the rock walls, but none of them were working. My headlights and running lights provided the only illumination, creating a moving bubble of visibility that showed maybe 50 yards ahead and left everything beyond in absolute darkness. At what I estimated was the halfway point, I saw the emergency parking bay. It was carved into the right wall, a rectangular alcove about 30 feet deep and 20 feet wide, with enough room for a truck to pull completely off the roadway. The bay was empty, except for some old equipment, rusty tools and cable spools that looked like they had been abandoned decades ago. A metal door was set into the back wall of the bay, with a sign that said Maintenance Access, Authorized Personnel Only. I was past the bay and starting to think about the exit when I noticed the footprints. They were in the thin layer of dust and grit on the tunnel floor, clearly visible in my headlights. Boot prints, fresh enough that the edges were still sharp and distinct. The prints started near the maintenance bay and ran alongside my lane, heading in the same direction I was traveling, toward the tunnel exit. That did not make sense. The detour had only been opened tonight because of the avalanche closure. There should not be anyone on foot in this tunnel, especially not maintenance workers walking the roadway in the dark. I slowed down, watching the footprints, and I noticed they were spaced wrong. The stride was too long, covering maybe 4 or 5 feet per step, which was beyond normal human gait even for someone tall. The CB radio came to life with that same static, broken voice. If you see footprints, do not follow them. Do not stop to investigate. Proceed directly to exit. The transmission cut out again, but the message was clear enough. I was not the first driver to notice the footprints. and whoever was monitoring this route knew they were there. I kept my speed steady at 25 miles per hour, watching the prints continue alongside my lane, never deviating, never stopping. At mile 18, according to my trip odometer, the footprints turned toward the left wall and disappeared into a crack in the rock. The crack was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, but it extended up beyond the reach of my headlights, creating a vertical fissure that seemed to go deep into the mountain. As I drove past, I could feel cold air flowing out of that crack, air that was far colder than the already freezing temperature inside the tunnel. The tunnel began to curve more sharply, bending to the left in a long arc. The walls closed in slightly and the ceiling lowered until I could see the rock surface just a few feet above my trailer. Water was dripping from somewhere overhead, steady cold drops that hit my windshield and left mineral stains when they dried. At mile 2.0, I saw the first anomaly. There was heat shimmer in the air ahead, the kind of distortion you see over hot pavement in summer. But the temperature in the tunnel was well below freezing, far too cold for any kind of natural heat shimmer. The distortion rippled and moved, flowing across the roadway like water, and my headlights seemed to bend around it, creating strange shadows on the tunnel walls. I slowed even more, down to 15 miles per hour, trying to understand what I was seeing. The shimmer was localized to a section about 20 feet long, hovering maybe 6 feet off the ground. As I got closer, I could see that it was not just visual distortion. The air itself looked different there, thicker somehow, like I was approaching a curtain of dense fog even though there was no visible moisture. The CB radio crackled, and this time the voice was clearer, though still edged with static. "Harlan Yates, this is Dirk Salvatierra with Tunnel Maintenance. You're approaching a thermal anomaly at mile 2. Do not stop. Do not turn off your engine. Maintain steady speed and proceed through the affected area. The anomaly will not harm your vehicle, but any disruption in your forward momentum may cause complications. Acknowledge." I grabbed the handset. "This is Yates. Acknowledged. What kind of complications are we talking about?" No response, just static and that underlying hum that seemed to resonate through the entire mountain. I was 10 feet from the shimmer when my instruments went haywire. The speedometer needle spun clockwise, then counterclockwise, then settled on a reading of 85 miles per hour, even though I was barely moving. The fuel gauge dropped to empty, then jumped to full, then started oscillating between the two. The temperature gauge climbed into the red zone, suggesting the engine was overheating, but I could hear the diesel running normally, felt no loss of power or unusual vibration. I entered the shimmer, and for a moment everything went wrong. The steering wheel turned ice cold under my hands, cold enough that I felt my skin sticking to the plastic. The windshield fogged over instantly, completely opaque, leaving me driving blind. The engine sound changed pitch, rising to a high whine that hurt my ears, and I felt the truck lurch sideways like something had shoved it from the side, even though I had not touched the wheel. Then I was through. The shimmer was behind me in my mirrors, still rippling and flowing across the roadway. My instruments returned to normal readings. The windshield cleared as quickly as it had fogged. The steering wheel warmed back to ambient temperature. But I was shaking, my heart pounding, and I could taste copper in my mouth like I had bitten my tongue. The tunnel exit appeared ahead, a circle of black night visible beyond the rough stone portal. I accelerated toward it, eager to be out of this mountain and back on normal highway. But as I approached the exit, I saw something that made me hit the brakes. There was a truck parked just outside the tunnel mouth, pulled off to the right on what looked like a gravel shoulder. The truck was a maintenance vehicle, an older model flatbed with equipment racks and a crew cab. Its lights were on, and someone was standing in the headlight beams, waving at me. As I got closer, I could see it was a man in a highway department uniform, heavy winter coat with reflective striping, hard hat, work gloves. I rolled down my window as I pulled alongside him, the cold night air rushing in. The man walked up to my door, and I got my first clear look at his face. He was maybe 40, weathered from years of outdoor work, with a thick beard and eyes that reflected my running lights with an odd greenish cast. "Harlan Yates," he said, his breath steaming in the frigid air. "I'm Dirk Salvatierra, tunnel maintenance supervisor. We need to talk about what you just drove through." I nodded, still trying to shake off the disorientation from the thermal anomaly. "That shimmer back there, what was it?" Dirk looked back at the tunnel entrance, and something in his expression made my chest tighten. "That's the problem," he said. "According to our instruments, there shouldn't be anyone in the tunnel right now. Our sensors show the portal is empty. No vehicles, no heat signatures, nothing. But I've been monitoring the radio traffic and I heard your transmissions. So either our sensors are malfunctioning or you're driving through something that our equipment can't detect." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What do you mean, can't detect? I just drove 2.5 miles through your tunnel." Dirk pulled a tablet from his coat pocket and held it up so I could see the screen. It showed a schematic of the tunnel, a simple line drawing with distance markers and sensor locations. The entire tunnel was shaded green, which according to the legend meant clear, no vehicles present. "This is our monitoring system," Dirk said. "It uses thermal imaging, motion sensors, and pressure plates embedded in the roadway. Nothing gets through Echo Portal without us knowing about it. But right now, at this exact moment, the system says the tunnel is empty and has been empty since we opened it for the detour 3 hours ago." I looked at the tunnel entrance behind me, then back at Dirk. "That's impossible. I just came from Grand Junction. I followed your detour signs. I drove through that tunnel and I saw footprints and that heat shimmer and my instruments went crazy and—" "I believe you," Dirk interrupted. "That's why I'm here. Because this isn't the first time this has happened. And I need to ask you some questions before you drive away. Because once you leave this location, things get complicated." He walked around to my passenger side and climbed up into the cab without waiting for an invitation. As he settled into the seat, I noticed that his highway department uniform looked wrong somehow. The patches were faded, the material worn thin, and when he took off his gloves, I saw his hands were covered in old scars, the kind that come from years of hard physical labor. "How long have you been working maintenance on this tunnel?" I asked. Dirk looked at me for a long moment before answering. 10 years, he said. "Since the night I drove through on a detour just like yours, and found out that sometimes the tunnel you enter is not the same tunnel you exit." Dirk Salvatierra sat in my passenger seat, his weathered face lit by the glow of my dashboard instruments. He had the tablet in his lap, and he was scrolling through screens of data that made no sense to me. Temperature readings and motion sensor logs and timestamps that seemed to overlap in impossible ways. Outside the cab, the night was still and cold, the kind of mountain silence that feels like the whole world is holding its breath. 10 years, I said, repeating his words back to him. "You've been working maintenance here for 10 years because you drove through on a detour." Dirk nodded without looking up from the tablet. "February 18th, 2015. I was hauling lumber from Glenwood Springs to Buena Vista. Same setup as you, avalanche closure on 91, detour through Echo Portal. I came out the other side and found a maintenance supervisor waiting for me, just like I'm waiting for you now. His name was Jude Kitteridge. He told me the same thing I'm about to tell you, that I had driven through something that shouldn't exist, and that from now on, I was part of the maintenance crew whether I wanted to be or not." I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. That's insane. You can't just conscript someone into working a tunnel because they drove through it. "You're right," Dirk said, finally looking at me. "It is insane, but it's also true. Here's what's going to happen, Harlan. You're going to drive away from here, deliver your load to Leadville, go home to wherever home is, and live your normal life. But once a month, maybe twice a month, you're going to get a message on your CB radio, Channel 9, usually late at night. The message will tell you that Echo Portal needs maintenance, and you'll drive here and spend a few hours checking sensors and recording data and walking the tunnel with a flashlight. And you'll do it because something inside you will know that if you don't, the tunnel stops being maintained. And when tunnels like this stop being maintained, they start doing things. What kind of things? I asked. Dirk pointed at the tablet screen. See these temperature readings? The tunnel is supposed to maintain a constant 45 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. That's standard for mountain tunnels this deep, insulated by thousands of feet of rock. But Echo Portal doesn't follow standard physics. The temperature inside fluctuates wildly, dropping to minus 40 in some sections, jumping to over 100 in others. The thermal anomaly you drove through registers at 240 degrees on our sensors, hot enough to melt asphalt, but the road surface is always intact when we check it physically. He swiped to another screen. Motion sensors. We have them installed every 100 feet throughout the tunnel. They're supposed to track vehicles, measure traffic flow, alert us to any stopped vehicles or pedestrians, but they pick up movement even when the tunnel is supposedly empty. Footsteps, usually. Always the same pattern. Starting at the maintenance bay, walking toward the exit. Stride length of 4 to 5 feet. We've recorded this pattern over 3,000 times in the past 10 years. Who's walking? I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer. That's the question, Dirk said. Jude thought they were residual echoes, fragments of people who had been in the tunnel back when it was in active use. 1952 to 1962, those were the operational years. Highway Department records show that Echo Portal was built as a shortcut for mining traffic, but it was closed after only a decade because of, quote, structural concerns and anomalous maintenance requirements. Reading between the lines, the tunnel started exhibiting the same weird properties back then that it shows now, and rather than try to fix it, they just closed it and built a longer route around the mountain. But it's open now, I said. You're using it as a detour route. Only when necessary, Dirk said, and only because someone needs to monitor it. The tunnel can't be sealed permanently. They tried that in 1963, poured a concrete wall across both portals. Within 6 months, the walls had massive cracks, and the thermal readings from inside were going haywire. They finally removed the barriers in 1965 and established the maintenance protocol. 1 truck per month minimum has to transit the tunnel to keep it stable. If it goes too long without traffic, the anomalies get worse. The footprints multiply. The heat signatures show up in more locations. And eventually, the things that make the footprints start appearing in other tunnels, other roads, spreading out from Echo Portal like an infection. I was silent for a long moment, processing what he was telling me. It sounded like the plot of a bad horror movie. Except I had just driven through that tunnel, felt my instruments go crazy, seen the footprints with my own eyes. I could not dismiss it as fantasy when the evidence was still fresh in my memory. "Show me the maintenance logs," I said. "If this has been going on since the 60s, there must be records." Dirk hesitated, then nodded. He tapped the tablet screen several times, bringing up a document that looked like it had been scanned from old paper records. The header read, Echo Portal Maintenance Log, Department of Highways Restricted Access. The first entry was dated March 3, 1965, written in careful handwriting that had been preserved through the digital scanning. Removed concrete barriers from both portals as per directive. Tunnel interior shows signs of thermal damage despite ambient temperature remaining constant at 43 degrees. Found footprints and dust on roadway, origin unknown. Recommend establishing monitoring protocol. I scrolled through more entries, watching the dates advance through the 60s and 70s. The handwriting changed as different maintenance supervisors took over, but the reports were consistent. Monthly inspections, temperature anomalies, unexplained footprints, occasional equipment malfunctions, and always, at the end of each report, a note about the number of transits that month. 2 trucks through this month. Anomalies within acceptable range. No traffic for 6 weeks. Temperature fluctuations increasing. Recommend scheduling transit soon. The entries from the 80s were more detailed, as if the maintenance supervisors were starting to understand what they were dealing with. The tunnel requires regular traffic to remain stable. Current theory. The construction process in 1952 intersected with some kind of natural geological formation, possibly a cave system or geothermal feature that creates the observed anomalies. Regular vehicle traffic appears to disrupt or dampen these effects. Without traffic, the formation becomes more active. But it was the entries from the 90s that made my skin crawl. The handwriting changed again, becoming rushed and less careful, and the tone of the reports shifted from scientific observation to something more desperate. November 12, 1994. No traffic through portal for 3 months due to road construction on access routes. Temperature readings show sustained periods above boiling point in multiple locations. Motion sensors recording continuous movement. Multiple entities. Stride patterns inconsistent with human gait. Maintenance crew refuses to enter tunnel without armed escort. Strongly recommend emergency transit to stabilize conditions. November 18, 1994. Emergency transit completed. Single tanker truck, driver name withheld per privacy regulations. Driver reported no unusual observations during transit, but post-transit interview revealed memory gaps and confusion about elapsed time. Tunnel sensors show temperature normalization within 24 hours of transit. Footprint patterns reduced to baseline levels. Crisis averted, but long-term solution needed. December 2, 1994. Meeting with State Transportation Department regarding Echo Portal status. Proposal to permanently close tunnel rejected due to concerns about anomaly spread. New protocol established. Minimum 2 transits per month. Drivers to be recruited from existing commercial traffic using detour signs. Volunteer basis preferred, but conscription authorized if necessary to maintain safety. I looked up from the tablet, meeting Dirk's eyes. Conscription. They actually wrote that in an official document. They had to, Dirk said. After 994, they realized that letting the tunnel go dormant was worse than keeping it active. But they couldn't just open it to regular traffic, couldn't put it on maps or GPS systems, because too many people would use it, and eventually someone would be inside during one of the worst anomalies. So they created the detour system. Fake avalanche closures, temporary road construction, any excuse to route a single truck through at controlled times. The driver thinks they're taking a shortcut. The tunnel gets its required transit, and the anomalies stay manageable. And the drivers who go through become part of the maintenance crew, I said. Only some of them, Dirk corrected. Most drivers transit without ever knowing anything was unusual. Their instruments might flicker, they might feel a moment of disorientation, but they come out the other side and go on with their lives. But every so often, maybe one driver out of 50, something different happens. They see too much, notice too many details, or the tunnel itself decides to reveal more to them. Those are the ones who become maintainers, the ones like you and me. I thought about the footprints I had seen, the thermal shimmer, the way my instruments had gone haywire. How do you know I'm one of them? Maybe I'm like the other 49 and I'll just drive away and forget about this. Dirk smiled, but there was no humor in it. Because you're still here. Because you let me into your cab. Because you're asking questions instead of calling me crazy and leaving. The drivers who aren't meant to know, they get uncomfortable when I approach them. They make excuses, they drive away, and by the next morning they've convinced themselves that nothing unusual happened. But you want to understand. And that's the difference. That's how the tunnel chooses. He handed me the tablet. Take this with you. All the maintenance logs are on here, along with the sensor access codes and the contact information for the other maintainers. There are 6 of us currently active, though Jude Kitteridge hasn't responded to calls in over a year, so maybe 5. We coordinate the scheduled transits, monitor the anomaly levels, and go in for physical inspections when the sensors show something that needs attention. Physical inspections, I repeated. You mean walking through the tunnel? When necessary, Dirk said. Usually it's not. Usually the transits are enough to keep things stable, but sometimes the sensors pick up readings that don't match any known pattern, or the footprints appear in places they shouldn't be able to reach, or we get reports from drivers about things we need to verify. That's when someone has to go in on foot with a flashlight and a radio and hope that whatever is making the footprints doesn't decide to make itself visible. Has anyone ever seen them? I asked. The things that make the footprints. Dirk was quiet for a moment, staring out the windshield at the dark tunnel entrance. Jude said he saw something once back in 2008. He was doing a midnight inspection, walking from the maintenance bay toward the exit when his flashlight died. He said he stood there in the complete darkness, and he felt something walk past him. Not brush against him, not touch him, just walk past. Close enough that he could feel the displacement of air. He said it was breathing, or making a sound like breathing, but the rhythm was wrong. Too slow, too deep, like lungs the size of oil drums filling and emptying. When his backup flashlight finally turned on, he was alone in the tunnel, but there were new footprints in the dust next to his own. 4 of them, spaced 5 feet apart, leading away toward the maintenance bay. After that, Dirk continued, Jude started getting obsessive about the tunnel. He would come out here 3-4 times a week, running inspections that didn't need to be done, staring at the sensor readings like they held some kind of secret message. He started talking about the tunnel like it was alive, like it had intentions and desires. Last time I saw him was January of last year. He said he had figured out what the tunnel wanted, and he was going to give it to him. Then he drove into Echo Portal at 2 in the morning, and nobody's seen him since. His truck never came out the other side. The sensors say the tunnel is empty, but sometimes, late at night, the motion detectors pick up movement in the maintenance bay, and the stride pattern matches human gait perfectly. No anomalous spacing, just someone walking back and forth like they're waiting for something. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the cold air coming through my open window. You think he's still in there? I think something that used to be him is still in there, Dirk said. Whether it's an echo or a ghost or something else, I don't know. But the tunnel doesn't let go of people easily. That's why we maintain it. That's why we keep the transits regular and monitor the sensors and go in for inspections when we have to. Because if we stop, if we let it go dormant again, then whatever happened to Jude might start happening to other people, in other tunnels, on other roads. He reached for the door handle, preparing to climb down from my cab. You'll get your first call in about 3 weeks. Channel 9, late night, probably when you're halfway through some other run. The voice will tell you that Echo Portal needs a transit, and you'll know to come here. Bring a notebook, start keeping your own logs. And whatever you do, don't go into the maintenance bay. That's where Jude always said the footprints started, and that's where they always lead back to. Something in there is watching, and the more attention you give it, the more interested it becomes in you. Dirk climbed down from the cab and closed the door. Through my window, he gave me a small wave, then walked back to his maintenance truck. I watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing around a curve in the mountain road, leaving me alone with my idling engine and the dark tunnel entrance behind me. I looked at the tablet he had left on my passenger seat. The screen was still showing the maintenance logs, and I scrolled through a few more entries, reading reports from the 2000s and 2010s. The tone had changed again in recent years, becoming more clinical, more resigned. These were people who had accepted that they were maintaining something they did not understand, following protocols that might not even be working, but doing it anyway because the alternative was worse. The last entry was dated 3 days ago, written by Dirk. Regular transit completed. Temperature readings normal. Motion sensors show baseline activity. Footprint pattern observed in maintenance bay, consistent with previous observations. No visual contact. Tunnel remains stable for now. Next scheduled transit in 4 weeks, unless anomaly levels increase. Current maintainer roster: Salvatierra, Yates, Brennan, Ortega, Pacheco. Kittredge status unknown. My name was already in the log. I had become part of the maintenance crew the moment I drove through Echo Portal, whether I wanted to be or not. I put the truck in gear and started driving toward Leadville, leaving the tunnel behind me. But I knew I would be back. In 3 weeks or 3 months, whenever the call came through on Channel 9, I would return to this mountain, drive through that dark passage, and add my own observations to the logs that stretched back 60 years. Because Dirk was right. The tunnel chose its maintainers, and once chosen, there was no walking away. In my rearview mirror, I could still see the tunnel entrance, a black rectangle cut into the mountainside. And as I watched, I saw a light appear inside the tunnel, a faint glow moving through the passage like someone walking with a flashlight. But I knew the tunnel was empty. The sensors said so. Dirk had confirmed it. There was no one inside Echo Portal. No one human, anyway. The light moved steadily toward the exit, and I accelerated, putting distance between myself and whatever was emerging from the mountain. I did not look back again until I was 5 miles down the road, and by then, the tunnel was out of sight, hidden by the curve of the mountain and the darkness of the Colorado night. But I could still feel it back there, breathing in its slow, impossible rhythm, waiting for the next transit, waiting for the next maintainer to accept their role in keeping it stable. And I knew that 3 weeks from now, when my CB radio crackled to life on Channel 9, I would turn my truck around and drive back to Echo Portal, because that is what maintainers do. We keep the tunnel breathing. We keep the footprints contained, and we pray that whatever makes them never decides to walk out into the world beyond the mountain. 3 weeks and 2 days after my first transit through Echo Portal, the call came exactly as Dirk had predicted. I was hauling refrigerated goods from Denver to Durango, halfway through the run, approaching midnight on a clear, cold night. The CB radio crackled on Channel 9, and a voice I did not recognize said simply, "Echo Portal requires maintenance. Respond if you can transit within 6 hours." I keyed the handset. "This is Harlan Yates. I can be there by 4 a.m. "Acknowledged," the voice said. "Temperature readings are elevated in Sector 3. Motion sensors showing increased activity. Standard inspection protocol. Dirk Salvatierra will meet you at the North Portal." I changed course at the next junction, leaving my scheduled route and heading northwest into the mountains. My dispatcher would be unhappy about the delay, but I had already established a pattern over the past 3 weeks of occasionally taking longer routes or making unexplained stops. I told him I was dealing with recurring electrical problems that required frequent maintenance checks. It was not entirely a lie. The tablet Dirk had given me was integrated with my truck's systems now, monitoring the tunnel's sensors even when I was hundreds of miles away. And sometimes it would trigger alerts that made my dashboard lights flicker in patterns that matched the anomaly readings from Echo Portal. I reached the tunnel access road at 3:45 a.m. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero, and the stars were so bright they looked like ice crystals frozen in the black sky. Dirk's maintenance truck was already parked at the north portal, its lights off, and I could see him standing outside the tunnel entrance, illuminated by my headlights as I pulled up. I climbed down from my cab, the cold hitting me like a physical blow. Dirk handed me a heavy parka with highway department patches and a hard hat with a mounted LED lamp. "Sector 3 is the maintenance bay area," he said without preamble. Temperature readings spiked to 180 degrees about 2 hours ago, then dropped back to normal. But the motion sensors are showing continuous activity, and there's a new footprint pattern we haven't seen before. Smaller prints, human-sized, starting from the maintenance access door and leading into the main tunnel. "You said not to go into the maintenance bay," I reminded him. "I said not to go in alone and not to give it too much attention," Dirk corrected. "But if something is coming out of the bay and walking into the tunnel, we need to document it. That's new behavior, and new behavior means the tunnel is changing. We go in together, we stay on the main roadway, and we don't open any doors. Understood?" I nodded, pulling on the parka and adjusting the hard hat. Dirk handed me a radio clipped to a shoulder harness, a digital camera, and a clipboard with blank inspection forms. "Standard protocol," he said. "We walk in, document what we see, take temperature readings at marked intervals, and walk out. The whole inspection should take 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. We don't stop except to record data. We don't investigate anything that looks unusual unless it's directly blocking the roadway. And if either of us says we need to leave, we leave immediately, no questions asked." He picked up his own equipment. A larger pack with monitoring gear and a heavy-duty flashlight that could double as a weapon. "One more thing," he said, looking me directly in the eyes. "If you see Jude Kitteridge in there, do not approach him. Do not speak to him. Do not acknowledge his presence. Whatever is walking around with his face is not him anymore, and engaging with it will only make things worse." We entered the tunnel side by side, our headlamps cutting through the darkness. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees once we were past the portal, and I could see ice forming on the tunnel walls, crystalline patterns that caught our lights and reflected them in strange angles. Our footsteps echoed, but the echoes were wrong, coming back too quickly from some directions and too slowly from others, like the tunnel's geometry did not match its visible dimensions. The first quarter mile was quiet. We stopped every 100 yards to check temperature sensors embedded in the walls, comparing the digital readings on Dirk's tablet with the mechanical backup thermometers mounted in protective housings. The readings matched, showing a steady 43 degrees Fahrenheit, exactly what the tunnel should maintain. But I could feel the cold more intensely than those numbers suggested, a bone-deep chill that made my joints ache. At the half-mile mark, we found the first anomaly. One of the motion sensors had been torn from the wall, leaving behind twisted mounting bolts and a spray pattern of what looked like rust stains on the concrete. But when Dirk examined the stains more closely with his flashlight, he shook his head. "Not rust," he said. "Mineral deposits, something with high iron content, probably from deep groundwater. But the sensor was just inspected 2 weeks ago, and it was intact then." He took photographs from multiple angles while I documented the damage on my inspection form. The sensor itself was nowhere to be seen, and there were no drag marks or debris suggesting it had been carried away. It was simply gone, ripped from the wall by something strong enough to shear through steel bolts. We continued deeper. At 3/4 of a mile, we reached the thermal anomaly zone where my instruments had gone haywire during my first tertius transit. This time, on foot, the effect was different. The air shimmered and rippled, but I could walk through it without the disorientation I had felt in my truck. Instead, I experienced a sensation of movement, like the air itself was flowing past me in currents that had nothing to do with ventilation or wind. Dirk's tablet showed temperature readings of 240 degrees in the center of the affected area, but I felt no heat, just that sense of invisible currents pulling at my clothes and making the hairs on my neck stand up. "It's getting stronger," Dirk muttered, recording the readings. "Last month, this zone was 50 yards long. Now it's closer to 80 yards, and the temperature peak is higher. Whatever geological formation is causing this, it's becoming more active." At mile 1-2, we reached the maintenance bay. The alcove was exactly as I remembered it from my first transit. A rectangular cutout in the tunnel wall with old equipment scattered around, and the metal access door set into the back wall. But now there was something new. The door was open, just a crack, maybe 6 inches, and pale light was leaking through the gap. Not electric light, not the warm glow of work lamps, but something cold and greenish like bioluminescence or foxfire. Dirk stopped at the edge of the bay, holding up a hand to keep me from advancing further. He pulled out his tablet and checked the sensor readings. "Motion detector shows activity inside the access corridor," he said quietly. "Something moving, consistent pattern, back and forth like pacing. But the thermal imaging shows nothing. No heat signature, no body temperature, just ambient stone temperature of 48 degrees. How can something be moving without producing heat?" I asked. "It can't," Dirk said. "Not if it's alive in any conventional sense. But the footprints are there, look." He pointed his flashlight at the floor of the bay, and I saw them clearly. Boot prints in the dust, fresh enough that the edges were sharp, leading from the access door out onto the main roadway. The prints were smaller than the anomalous ones I had seen during my first transit. These were normal-sized, maybe a man's size 10 or 11. And they led directly out of the bay, crossed the roadway, and stopped at the opposite wall, where they simply ended as if the person making them had walked directly into solid stone. Dirk took photographs while I measured the prints and recorded their dimensions. The tread pattern was distinctive, a work boot with a grid pattern that looked like it belonged to heavy-duty hiking or construction footwear. I had seen that pattern before, though I could not immediately place where. "We need to check the access corridor," Dirk said, though I could hear the reluctance in his voice. "New protocol. If there's evidence of movement inside the maintenance areas, we document it. We don't have to go in deep, just far enough to see what's beyond the door." He approached the metal door slowly, keeping his flashlight trained on the gap. I followed, my heart pounding, every instinct telling me this was a bad idea. The greenish light from inside pulsed slightly, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that might have been random or might have been deliberate. As we got closer, I could hear sound from beyond the door. Not footsteps, not voices, but a low vibration, almost subsonic, that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. Dirk reached the door and carefully pulled it wider, revealing the corridor beyond. It was rough stone, unfinished, with timber supports that looked like they dated back to the original construction in 1952. The corridor extended about 30 feet before opening into a larger space, and the greenish light was coming from that larger space, pulsing and shifting. The vibration grew stronger as the door opened, and I realized it matched the rhythm I had felt during my first transit. The same pulse as the thermal anomaly, the same breathing rhythm that Dirk said Jude had heard in the darkness. The footprints continued into the corridor, and now I could see that there were multiple sets, overlapping, as if several people had been walking back and forth. Some of the prints were older, nearly faded, while others looked like they had been made minutes ago. And at the far end of the corridor, silhouetted against the greenish light, I saw a figure standing motionless. The figure was man-shaped, wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform similar to the one Dirk wore. But something was wrong with the proportions. The arms were too long, hanging below the knees, and the head was tilted at an angle that suggested the neck was broken, or the skull was deformed. As we watched, the figure raised one hand in a slow wave, the gesture mechanical and precise. "Jude," Dirk whispered, and I heard a note in his voice I had not heard before. Fear, yes, but also recognition and terrible sadness. The figure in the corridor began walking toward us, its gait wrong, legs moving in that too long stride I'd seen in the footprint patterns during my first transit. 4 feet per step, maybe 5, covering the distance quickly despite moving with an unhurried pace. The greenish light followed it, or came from it. I could not tell which, pulsing brighter with each footfall. Dirk grabbed my arm and pulled me back from the door. "Close it," he said urgently. "Close it now, and we leave. Standard protocol, no engagement. We document and exit." I helped him push the metal door shut, and we heard the click of the latch engaging. But through the door, I could hear footsteps continuing, approaching the threshold, then stopping. The vibration intensified, making the door rattle in its frame, and for a moment I thought whatever was on the other side would simply push through. But then the vibration stopped, the footsteps retreated, and we were left in silence broken only by our own harsh breathing. Dirk was already walking quickly back toward the tunnel entrance, his flashlight beam bouncing erratically as he moved. I followed, checking over my shoulder every few seconds, expecting to see the maintenance bay door burst open, expecting to see that wrongly proportioned figure emerge and follow us. But the door remained closed, and the greenish light gradually faded from the gap underneath it. We made it to the 3/4-mile mark before Dirk stopped and turned to face me. His face was pale under his hard hat, and his hands were shaking slightly as he pulled out his tablet to record our observations. "That was him," he said. "That was Jude, or something wearing Jude. The build was right, the uniform was right. Even the way he waved was right. That's exactly how Jude used to acknowledge people when he saw them from a distance. But the proportions were wrong," I said. "The arms, the stride length. The tunnel changed him," Dirk said. "Or made a copy that's not quite accurate. Or something else is using his appearance. I don't know which is worse." He finished entering data into the tablet and looked back toward the maintenance bay, though we could no longer see it from our position. "This changes everything. Jude isn't just missing. He's inside the access corridors, and he's moving between the maintenance areas and the main tunnel. If he starts appearing during regular transits, if drivers see him, the whole system falls apart." "What do we do?" I asked. "We finish the inspection," Dirk said. "We document everything according to protocol, and then we call an emergency meeting with the other maintainers, because this is beyond standard maintenance now. This is containment." We continued toward the exit, moving faster now, our earlier caution replaced by urgency. The tunnel felt different on the return walk, the walls seeming closer, the ceiling lower, the darkness more aggressive in pushing back against our lights. Every shadow might have hidden a figure, every echo might have been footsteps following us, and I found myself walking faster and faster until we were almost jogging by the time we reached the final 100 yards. The exit appeared ahead, that blessed circle of gray, pre-dawn light, and I felt a surge of relief so intense it was almost painful. We emerged into the cold mountain air, and I gulped it down, realizing I'd been breathing shallowly throughout the entire inspection, as if some part of me had been afraid to draw the tunnel's air too deeply into my lungs. Dirk immediately pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in quick, urgent sentences to whoever answered. I could only hear his side of the conversation, but the words I caught were enough. Active mischievous manifestation, access corridor, visual confirmation, need meeting within 24 hours. While he talked, I walked to my truck and climbed into the cab, needing the familiar space, the normal surfaces, the reliable instruments. I pulled out the tablet and reviewed the data we had collected. Temperature spikes, motion sensor damage, footprint measurements, photographic evidence. It all looked official and scientific in the neat digital forms, but it did nothing to capture the reality of what we had seen, the wrongness of that figure in the corridor, the feeling of being watched by something that wore a human shape but had forgotten or never known how to properly inhabit it. Dirk finished his call and walked over to my truck. Meeting is set for tomorrow night, 9 p.m. at the Flying J in Frisco. All active maintainers will be there. We're going to review the protocols and decide if Echo Portal needs to be shut down permanently. Consequences be damned. Can it be shut down? I asked. I thought you said that made things worse. It does, Dirk admitted. But having Jude or whatever he's become walking around in there might be worse. We need to discuss options, figure out if there's a way to contain the access corridors without sealing the main tunnel. Maybe welding the maintenance doors shut. Maybe filling the corridors with concrete, I don't know. But we can't leave things as they are. He looked back at the tunnel entrance one more time. And in the growing light of dawn, I could see how exhausted he looked. How the years of maintenance had worn him down. 10 years I've been doing this, he said. 10 years of monitoring and inspecting and keeping this thing stable. And now I'm wondering if we've been making a mistake the whole time. Maybe the tunnel was supposed to be sealed in 1963. Maybe we've been feeding it by keeping it active, giving it the energy it needs to grow and change and create things like what we saw in that corridor. You think the transits make it stronger? I asked. I think the tunnel needs something from us, Dirk said. I just don't know what. Traffic, attention, maintenance, maybe all of those things. And I think it's been slowly getting what it needs for 60 years, and now it's strong enough to start keeping people. First Jude, but who's next? How many more transits before another maintainer goes missing? How many before it reaches out beyond the mountain and starts affecting other tunnels, other roads? He walked back to his maintenance truck without another word, climbed in, and drove away, leaving me alone with the tunnel entrance and the morning light slowly painting the mountain peaks. I sat in my cab for a long time, staring at that dark opening in the rock, thinking about what I had seen in the access corridor. The figure had waved at us, a simple gesture, friendly almost, if you ignored the wrong proportions and the impossible stride. But I kept thinking about that wave, about how precise it was, how deliberate. It was not a threat, it was not a warning, it was an invitation. Jude Kittredge, or whatever wore his shape now, was inviting us to come deeper, to enter the access corridors, to see what he had seen and become what he had become. And some part of me, a part I was ashamed to acknowledge, wanted to accept that invitation, wanted to know what was beyond that greenish light, what breathed in the rhythm of the mountain's pulse. I started my engine and drove away from Echo Portal, but I knew I would be back. Not just for the scheduled transits and inspections, but because the tunnel had shown me something, given me a glimpse of whatever existed in those maintenance corridors, and now I needed to know more. Dirk was right. We might have been feeding the tunnel all these years, but the tunnel had been feeding something to us as well. Small pieces of knowledge, tiny revelations, hints of a truth that existed beneath the mountain. And once you started consuming that truth, once you took even the smallest bite, you could never stop being hungry for more. The meeting at the Flying J in Frisco brought together 5 maintainers, though Dirk had said there should be 6. We sat in a back corner booth at 9 p.m., far from the other truckers and travelers, our faces lit by the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Dirk made introductions quickly. There was myself, newest to the crew. Brennan, a woman in her 50s who had been maintaining Echo Portal for 7 years after a winter transit gone wrong. Ortega, a younger guy maybe 30 years old, 3 years of maintenance work, still visibly nervous about the whole situation. And Pacheco, the oldest of us, pushing 70, who had been recruited back in 98. 98, shh, and had seen more anomalies than the rest of us combined. Jude Kitteridge's seat remained empty, a 6th coffee cup sitting untouched in front of the vacant space. Dirk laid out the situation with brutal efficiency. The inspection findings, the open maintenance door, the figure in the access corridor, the visual confirmation that matched Jude's appearance but with those wrong proportions. He showed the photographs on his tablet, and I watched the others' reactions. Brennan's face went pale. Ortega actually pushed back from the table, hands shaking. Only Pacheco seemed unsurprised, nodding slowly as if this was something he had been expecting. "We knew this would happen eventually," Pacheco said when Dirk finished. His voice was rough, weathered by decades of mountain driving. Jude was getting too close. He spent too much time in the tunnel, paid too much attention to the patterns, started treating it like something he could understand instead of something he should respect and avoid. The tunnel took him because he invited it to. "What do you mean, invited it?" I asked. Pacheco leaned back in the booth, his coffee untouched. "The tunnel operates on attention. The more you focus on it, the more you try to understand it, the more it reveals itself to you. That's how it recruits maintainers in the first place. Most drivers pass through and forget. But some of us notice too much, ask too many questions, and then we're hooked. We become part of the maintenance crew because we can't let it go." Jude took that further than anyone should. He started keeping his own logs, separate from the official records. He would go into the tunnel during off hours, sometimes spending 12 hours straight walking the passages, taking readings, mapping the access corridors. "I didn't know there were multiple access corridors," Brennan said. "There are at least 7 that we know of," Pacheco replied. "One at the maintenance bay, which is the only one we monitor regularly, but there are others at various points throughout the tunnel, hidden behind panels or concealed in shadow alcoves. Jude found them over the years, marked them in his private logs. He believed they formed a network, a system of passages that extended deep into the mountain, possibly connecting to natural cave formations or old mining shafts from before the tunnel was built." Dirk was staring at Pacheco with an expression I could not quite read. "You knew about this. About Jude's private investigation. Why didn't you report it?" "Because I understood what he was doing," Pacheco said. "Same thing all of us are doing, just more intensive. Trying to figure out what we're maintaining, what we're feeding with our transits and inspections. The official logs treat Echo Portal like a standard infrastructure problem, temperature anomalies and sensor malfunctions. But you've all felt it. You know there's something else going on, something the reports don't capture." He pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket pocket and laid it on the table. The cover was stained and dog-eared, filled with handwritten notes and sketches. "Jude gave me this 3 months before he disappeared. Said it was his backup copy, in case something happened to him. He made me promise I would only share it if he didn't come back, and that I would make sure whoever read it understood the risks of knowing too much." Dirk reached for the notebook, but Pacheco held it back. "Before you look at this, you need to understand something. The tunnel is not a passive thing. It's not just a geological formation that happens to produce weird readings. It responds to observation. The more we study it, the more we try to document and understand it, the more active it becomes. Jude's theory was that the tunnel is some kind of interface, a place where our reality intersects with something else. and our attention is what powers that intersection. Every transit, every inspection, every moment of focused observation feeds energy into the interface and makes it stronger. "That's insane," Ortega said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Pacheco asked. "Think about the pattern. The tunnel was built in 1952, probably intersecting with something that was already there, some natural formation. For 10 years it operated normally, or close to normal. Then the anomalies started, and by 1962 they had to close it. They tried sealing it in 1963, and what happened? The anomalies got worse, spreading beyond the tunnel boundaries. So they opened it back up and established the maintenance protocol. Regular transits, minimal but consistent traffic, just enough attention to keep things stable but not so much that it grows out of control. And for 60 years that worked, until Jude decided to really pay attention, to study the tunnel seriously, and now look what's happened." He pushed the notebook across the table to Dirk. "His last entries are in there, the ones he wrote just before he went in that final time. Read them, and then tell me if you still think we should keep maintaining this tunnel, or if maybe we should walk away and let whatever wants to happen, happen." Dirk opened the notebook to the last pages. I could see Jude's handwriting, smaller and more cramped than in the earlier entries, as if he had been writing quickly or under stress. Dirk read silently for a long moment, his expression growing darker. Then he began reading aloud so the rest of us could hear. January 14th, 2024. I've been inside the access corridors for 6 hours now, deeper than I've ever gone before. The main maintenance corridor extends approximately 800 feet into the mountain before branching into 3 separate passages. I've designated them Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. Alpha leads upward at a 15-degree incline, possibly toward the mountain peak. Beta continues roughly horizontal, following what might be a natural fault line. Gamma descends sharply, dropping at least 200 feet over a 300-foot distance. The temperature in the corridors is constant at 62 degrees, warmer than the main tunnel. The air quality is good, no gas buildup or oxygen depletion that I can detect. But there's something else in the air, something I can taste on my tongue like copper or ozone. The vibration I've felt during previous visits is stronger here, almost painful, resonating in my chest and making it hard to breathe deeply. I've found evidence of previous human presence, tool marks on the walls, old wooden supports that predate the tunnel construction by decades, possibly from mining operations in the 1800s, and footprints in the dust, lots of them, various sizes and tread patterns, some very old and some that look recent. I can't tell if these are from other maintainers who explored these corridors and never reported it, or if they're from something else. Dirk paused, looking up at us. He's describing an exploration we have no official record of. 6 hours inside the access corridors alone, going deeper than anyone was authorized to go. "Keep reading," Pacheco said quietly. Dirk continued. January 15th, I went back into Gamma Corridor last night, following it down as far as I dared. The passage opens into a larger chamber approximately 400 feet below the main tunnel level. The chamber is natural, a limestone cavern with formations that suggest it's been here for thousands of years. But there are modifications, human-made structures integrated with the natural stone. Concrete platforms, metal railings, electrical conduits that don't connect to anything I can identify. The greenish light I've reported seeing near the maintenance bay access is stronger here. It's coming from the rock itself, or from something inside the rock. Bioluminescence is my best guess, but the spectrum is wrong. When I shine my flashlight on the glowing areas, they dim, as if they're sensitive to external light sources. And when I turn off my light and sit in the darkness, the glow intensifies and begins to pulse in that same rhythm I've been tracking, that slow, breathing pattern. I stayed in the chamber for 3 hours, just sitting and observing, and I started to understand something. The breathing isn't random, it's communicative. The pulses carry information, patterns within patterns, like a language or code. I don't have the tools to decode it properly, but I can feel the meaning, sense the intention behind it. The tunnel isn't trying to trap us or harm us. It's trying to show us something, teach us something, and the only way to learn is to go deeper, to spend more time in the presence of that pulsing light. Brennan interrupted. He's describing psychosis, hypoxia or carbon monoxide poisoning or something. You can't trust observations made in that state. Maybe, Dirk said, but there's more. He turned to the final entry. January 17th. This will be my last log entry before I go in for an extended stay. I've packed supplies for a week in the deep chamber. Water, food, batteries, extra equipment. I'm going to document the patterns fully, establish a proper baseline for the communication I've been sensing. The other maintainers won't understand this. They'll think I've lost perspective, become obsessed, but I haven't. I've just finally understood what we've been maintaining all these years. Echo Portal isn't a tunnel with anomalies. It's a doorway that we've been keeping partially open. Every transit, every inspection, every moment of attention we give it, we're preventing it from closing completely. And I think that's wrong. I think it needs to be allowed to open fully, to complete whatever process started when they blasted through the mountain in 1952 and accidentally intersected with that chamber below. The things that walk in the tunnel, the footprints with the wrong stride length, the figures that show up on motion sensors but not thermal imaging. Those aren't ghosts or echoes or anomalies. There's something trying to cross through the doorway, something that exists in the space on the other side. And they're not hostile. They're curious. They want to understand us as much as we want to understand them. The only way to establish communication is to meet them halfway, to go through the doorway and spend time on their side. I'm going to do that. I'm going down to the deep chamber, and I'm going to stay there until I understand what's happening, until I can communicate properly with whatever is producing that pulsing light. If I don't come back, it means I found something better on the other side. If I do come back, I'll have answers. Either way, don't come looking for me. Don't try to close the tunnel. Let it breathe. Let it become what it's trying to become. That's the real maintenance we should be doing, facilitating the transformation, not preventing it. Dirk closed the notebook and set it on the table. The silence in the booth was profound, broken only by the ambient noise of the truck stop around us, the muted conversations of other drivers, the hiss of the coffee maker, the distant rumble of engines. He went insane, Ortega said finally. Whatever he experienced in that chamber, it broke his mind and made him think he was communicating with something. Or he was right, I said, surprising myself with the words. What if he really was sensing something? What if the tunnel really is trying to communicate? All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of their attention. But I continued, because something about Jude's final entries resonated with my own experiences. I've only been through Echo Portal twice, once as a transit, once on foot, but both times I felt something, not just fear or disorientation, but a sense of presence, of being observed by something that was trying to understand me. When we saw that figure in the maintenance corridor, when it waved at us, that wasn't a threat. It was exactly what Jude said, curiosity, an attempt at contact. You can't seriously be considering this, Brennan said. I'm not saying we should follow Jude's path, I replied, but maybe we should reconsider our approach. We've been treating Echo Portal like a hazard to be managed, an infrastructure problem to be solved with monitoring and maintenance. What if that's wrong? What if it needs something different from us? Pacheco was nodding slowly. I've been thinking the same thing for years. The tunnel keeps calling us back. It recruits maintainers, creates situations that force us to return and pay attention to it. That's not random, that's intentional. It wants something from us, and until we figure out what that is, we're just going to keep repeating the same cycle. Dirk stood up abruptly, pacing beside the booth. This is exactly the kind of thinking that got Jude lost. You start anthropomorphizing the tunnel, attributing intentions and desires to what's probably just a weird geological formation, and the next thing you know, you're walking into a cave with a week's worth of supplies and planning to commune with glowing rocks. Then what's your alternative? I asked. We keep doing standard maintenance until another one of us disappears? We try to seal it again and risk the anomalies spreading? Or we walk away entirely and hope that whatever happens far enough from population centers that it doesn't matter? Dirk stopped pacing and looked at each of us in turn. I don't know, he admitted. That's why I called this meeting, because I've been maintaining Echo Portal for 10 years and I thought I understood what we were doing. But after seeing Jude in that corridor, after reading his logs, I don't know anymore. Maybe he's right. Maybe we've been doing it wrong all along. There's one way to find out, Pacheco said. He was looking directly at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone needs to go into the deep chamber, not for a week like Jude planned, but for a few hours, properly equipped, with communication maintained with the surface, with a plan for extraction if things go wrong. We need to verify what's down there, document it properly, and determine if there's really anything trying to communicate, or if it's just environmental effects causing hallucinations. That's a suicide mission, Brennan said flatly. It's a controlled investigation, Pacheco corrected. And it's necessary. We can't keep operating on assumptions and fear. We need data. Real observations from someone who's willing to go deep enough to get answers but disciplined enough to come back out. Why are you looking at me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because you're the newest, Pacheco said. You don't have years of accumulated fear and preconceptions. You felt the presence, acknowledged it, but you haven't built up defensive mechanisms against it. That makes you the best candidate to establish contact, if contact is possible. And if it's not possible, if there's nothing down there but toxic gas and hallucinations, you're the most likely to recognize that and abort the mission before you end up like Jude. I looked around the table at the other maintainers. Dirk was staring at his coffee, unwilling to meet my eyes. Brennan looked like she wanted to argue but could not find the words. Ortega was pale, clearly relieved that the attention was not on him. Only Pacheco met my gaze directly, and I saw in his eyes something I had not expected. Hope. He genuinely believed that going into the deep chamber might provide answers, might change our understanding of what we were dealing with. If I do this, I said slowly, I need guarantees. Full safety equipment, communication maintained at all times, and a rescue team ready to pull me out if I call for extraction. And I want access to all of Jude's logs, not just the final entries. Everything he documented about the access corridors and the deep chamber. Pacheco nodded. Agreed. We'll need a week to prepare. Gather the right equipment, establish a communication relay that can reach underground, brief you on everything Jude documented. The next scheduled maintenance window is in 6 days. We'll use that as our cover. Tell the official monitoring system that we're doing an extended inspection. I'll coordinate logistics, Dirk said, though his voice suggested he was not happy about the decision. But I want it on record that I think this is a mistake. We're not researchers. We're truck drivers who got recruited into maintaining something we don't understand. This is beyond our scope. It's been beyond our scope from the beginning, Pacheco said. We've just been pretending otherwise. The meeting broke up shortly after that, each of us heading back to our trucks and our regular routes. But we all knew we would be back at Echo Portal in 6 days, and that what happened there might change everything, or end everything, or reveal that there was nothing to change or end, just an empty chamber and the echoes of Jude's deteriorating mind. I spent the next 6 days running my normal loads, but I could not focus on the work. My mind kept drifting back to Jude's logs, to his description of the deep chamber and the pulsing light, to the idea that something beneath the mountain was trying to communicate across some fundamental barrier between realities. I told myself it was probably nothing, probably just gases or radiation or some other environmental factor that created hallucinations. But I could not shake the memory of that figure in the maintenance corridor, the way it had waved at us, the deliberate nature of that gesture. On the 6th night, I drove back to Echo Portal. The others were already there, Dirk's maintenance truck and Pacheco's rig parked outside the north portal. They had brought equipment, more than I expected. Climbing gear, rope, extra lights, oxygen sensors, carbon monoxide detectors, a portable ventilation fan, first aid supplies, and a communication setup that included a CB base station and a series of relay units that could be placed along the descent route. Pacheco handed me a climbing harness and a hard hat with multiple light sources. "We've been testing the relay system," he said. "It works down to about 500 feet, which should be deep enough to reach the chamber Jude described. Every 100 feet, you'll place one of these repeater units. They'll boost the signal and maintain the connection. If at any point you lose communication, you abort and come back up immediately. Understood?" I nodded, strapping on the harness and checking the equipment. Dirk gave me a radio tuned to our private frequency and I tested it, confirming I could hear his voice clearly. "Remember," he said, "you're not Jude. You don't have to understand everything or document everything. Your mission is simple. Get to the deep chamber, observe for 30 minutes, report what you see, and come back. No extended stays, no attempts at communication, just observation and extraction." "What if something tries to communicate with me?" I asked. Dirk was quiet for a moment. "Then you document it and report it. But you don't engage. You don't make promises or agreements. You just observe and come back. We can make decisions about next steps once we have your report." At midnight, I entered the tunnel alone, my lights cutting through the familiar darkness. I moved quickly through the first mile, past the thermal anomaly zone that shimmered and pulsed as I walked through it, past the emergency bay where we had seen the figure in the access corridor. The maintenance door was closed now, sealed with heavy chains and padlocks that Dirk had installed after our last inspection. But I was not going in through that door. Pacheco had given me coordinates for one of the other access points Jude had discovered, a concealed panel in the tunnel wall at mile 18. I found it exactly where the logs had indicated, a section of concrete that looked solid but could be pushed aside to reveal a narrow opening. I slipped through into a rough stone passage that immediately began to descend. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders, and I had to move carefully to avoid snagging my equipment on the rough walls. My radio crackled, and I heard Dirk's voice. "Harlan, we're receiving your signal. Confirm you're in the access corridor." "Confirmed," I replied. "Beginning descent. Placing first relay unit now." I attached the first repeater to the wall with adhesive mounts and continued down. The passage widened after about 50 feet, opening into a more natural tunnel that showed signs of old mining work. Tool marks, support timbers, rusted equipment abandoned decades ago. I placed relay units every 100 feet as instructed, testing the communication at each stop. Dirk's voice remained clear, reassuring me that the system was working. At 300 feet below the main tunnel, I reached the first branching point. 3 passages led off in different directions, exactly as Jude had described. Alpha rising toward the mountain peak, Beta continuing horizontally, Gamma descending sharply into the depths. I took Gamma, following Jude's path, using the rope to control my descent on the steep sections. The vibration that Pacheco and Jude had both described became noticeable around 400 feet. It started as a faint hum that I felt more than heard, then intensified into a physical sensation, a pulse that resonated in my chest and made my vision blur slightly with each beat. The rhythm was slow, maybe 12 beats per minute, like a heart beating in the mountain's core. At 500 feet, I entered the chamber Jude had described. It was everything he had said and more. A natural limestone cavern, perhaps 60 feet in diameter, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above my light's reach. Stalactites hung like frozen waterfalls, and the walls were covered with mineral formations that had grown over thousands of years. But interspersed with the natural features were human-made structures. Concrete platforms built into the rock, metal scaffolding that served no obvious purpose, and electrical conduits that ran along the walls and disappeared into drilled holes. And there was the light, the greenish bioluminescent glow that Jude had documented, coming from patches on the walls and floor, pulsing in time with the vibration I felt in my chest. The light was beautiful, unlike anything I had ever seen, each pulse revealing new patterns in the rock, new formations that seemed to appear and disappear with the rhythm. "Harlan, we're receiving your signal," Dirk's voice said through the radio. "What's your status?" "I've reached the chamber," I replied. "It's exactly as Jude described. The light is here, pulsing. The vibration is strong. No signs of danger, no gas readings. Oxygen levels are normal. I'm going to observe for the planned 30 minutes. Copy that. We're monitoring from the surface. Report every 5 minutes." I found a concrete platform that looked stable and sat down, turning off my helmet lights to see the chamber in its natural state. With my artificial lights extinguished, the greenish glow intensified, and I could see the patterns more clearly. They were not random. The pulses moved across the walls in waves, creating temporary shapes and symbols that faded as the next pulse arrived. And I realized Jude had been right. This was language, or something like language, information being expressed through light and rhythm. I sat there for 5 minutes watching the patterns, feeling the vibration, and gradually I began to sense something behind the display. Not a presence exactly, but an awareness, a sense of being observed and analyzed. The patterns began to change, responding to my attention, creating new combinations of light and shadow that seemed directed at me specifically. "Harlan, 5-minute check-in," Dirk's voice said. "All good," I replied. "The light patterns are responsive. They change when I focus on them." Jude was right about that part. This might be some form of communication. I continued observing, and the patterns became more complex, more specific. I saw shapes that resembled geological structures, diagrams of tunnels and chambers, maps of the mountain's interior. I saw what might have been timelines, sequences of events represented by varying intensities of light. And I saw figures, human shapes rendered in bioluminescence, walking through the tunnels, descending into the chambers, some of them staying, some of them leaving, some of them transforming into something else. At the 15-minute mark, I saw Jude. His shape appeared in the patterns, rendered in light, walking down through the access corridors just as I had done. But his journey did not end in the chamber. The patterns showed him going deeper, through passages I had not explored, into spaces beneath the chamber where the light grew brighter and the shapes more complex. And at the end of his journey, I saw him standing in a space that was not quite cave and not quite room, his human form dissolving into light, merging with the patterns, becoming part of the display. "Harlan, 15-minute check-in," Dirk's voice was concerned now. "Your vitals are showing elevated heart rate. Are you okay?" "I see him," I said. "I see Jude. The patterns are showing me what happened to him. He went deeper than this chamber. There are passages below here, and he followed them until he reached something, and then he became part of it." "That's hallucination," Dirk said firmly. "Environmental factors affecting your perception. You need to begin extraction now." But I could not move yet because the patterns were still showing me things. They were showing me the tunnel's history. The moment in 1952 when the construction crews blasted through the rock and accidentally broke through into these chambers. The moment when two realities intersected. When the space beneath the mountain opened a connection to somewhere else. Somewhere that existed in patterns of light and rhythm rather than solid matter. The tunnel was not a doorway between places. It was a doorway between states of being. The pattern showed me the maintenance crews, the decades of people trying to understand and control what they had discovered. They showed me the transits, the energy we provided every time a truck drove through, every time a maintainer descended into the depths. We were feeding it, just as Pacheco had suspected, but not in a predatory sense. We were providing a bridge, a connection between the solid world above and the pattern world below. Our attention, our observation, our very presence created the interface that allowed the two realities to coexist. And Jude had gone all the way through. He had dissolved his solid form and reconstituted himself as patterns, becoming part of the light display, learning to communicate in rhythm and luminescence instead of words and gestures. The figure we had seen in the maintenance corridor was not a monster wearing Jude's shape. It was Jude trying to come back, trying to translate himself back into solid form, but not quite succeeding because he had spent too long existing as patterns. His proportions were wrong because he was remembering human shape from the inside of the pattern world, and the translation was imperfect. "Harlan, you need to respond. We're preparing to send a rescue team." I keyed my radio. "I'm fine. I understand now. I understand what Jude found, what the tunnel is, what we've been maintaining all these years. It's not dangerous. It's not trying to trap us. It's just different, existing in a state we don't have words for. And it's been trying to show us that, teach us that, every time we come down here." "That's the gas talking," Dirk said. "Your oxygen sensor is showing normal readings, but there could be other compounds affecting you. Begin extraction immediately. That's an order." I stood up, turning my helmet lights back on, and the bioluminescent glow dimmed in response to the artificial light. The patterns faded, leaving only natural rock formations and the human-made structures that had been built to study them. I felt the loss immediately, like closing a book before reaching the end of the story. "I'm starting extraction," I said into the radio. "But Dirk, we need to talk about this when I get back up. We need to reconsider everything we think we know about Echo Portal." The climb back up took twice as long as the descent, and every step away from that chamber felt wrong, like I was walking in the wrong direction. I kept looking back, seeing the greenish glow fading in the distance, and part of me wanted to turn around, descend again, stay longer, learn more. But I forced myself to keep climbing, collecting the relay units as I passed them, maintaining communication with Dirk. When I finally emerged from the access corridor and stepped back into the main tunnel, I felt the temperature difference immediately. The chill of the mountain air versus the strange warmth of the chamber below. Dirk and Pacheco were waiting at the access point, and they grabbed me as soon as I appeared, checking me over with the urgency of people who had been genuinely worried. "Your radio transmission got strange toward the end," Dirk said. "You were talking about pattern worlds and translation and things that don't make sense. We thought we were losing you." "You weren't losing me," I said. "I was finding something, learning something. Whatever Jude discovered down there, it's real. It's not hallucination or gas or environmental effects. There's something beneath this mountain that exists in a completely different way than we do, and the tunnel is the interface between our existence and theirs. Pacheco was nodding, his weathered face showing something that might have been vindication. You saw the patterns, the light communication. I saw more than that, I said. I saw what happened to Jude. He went deeper than the chamber I reached, and he found a way to translate himself into their form of existence. That's why he looks wrong when we see him in the corridors. He's trying to come back, trying to exist in both forms at once, but it's not working perfectly. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Dirk said. You went down there as a skeptic and came back as a believer. That's how the tunnel gets you. It shows you things that seem profound and meaningful, and you start thinking you've discovered some great truth, when really you're just experiencing neural effects from environmental exposure. Then, how do you explain the patterns? I asked. The way they responded to my attention showed me specific information about the tunnel's history and Jude's journey. That's not random neural misfiring, that's communication. It's interpretation, Dirk countered. Your brain taking random stimuli and creating meaning from it, the same way people see faces in clouds or hear voices in white noise. You wanted to find meaning down there, so you found it. We stood there in the tunnel, the three of us, and I realized we were at an impasse. Dirk represented the old way of thinking, treating Echo Portal as a hazard to be managed. Pacheco represented the new way, seeing it as an opportunity for understanding. And I was caught in the middle, having experienced something that felt profoundly real, but that I could not prove to someone who had not been there. What do we do now? I asked. Pacheco pulled out his phone and showed me the monitoring data from my descent. Temperature readings, motion sensors, radio transmission logs. We document everything, he said. We add your observations to the official logs, and we make a decision as a group about whether to continue standard maintenance protocols or to explore this further. There's nothing to explore, Dirk insisted. Harlan went into a chamber, experienced some unusual effects, and came back with theories that can't be tested or verified. That doesn't change our job. We keep the tunnel stable, we prevent the anomalies from spreading, and we don't lose any more maintainers to whatever is down there. What if Jude's not lost? I said. What if he found something better? What if the reason he's trying to come back is not because he's trapped, but because he wants to show us what he's learned? Dirk stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. I can't do this anymore, he said. 10 years of maintenance, of trying to keep this thing under control, and now it's taking people's minds even when they come back out. I'm done. Find someone else to coordinate the transits and inspections. I'm out. He walked toward his maintenance truck without another word. Pacheco and I watched him go, and I felt a mix of understanding and disappointment. Dirk had been the anchor, the one who kept us focused on practical concerns, and now he was leaving because the practical had collided with the inexplicable. He'll be back, Pacheco said quietly. They always come back. The tunnel doesn't let go once it has its hooks in you, but he needs time to process what's happening, to reconcile his understanding of the world with what we're learning about this place. What are we learning? I asked. Really? Because I'm not sure I understand it myself. Pacheco smiled, the expression tired but genuine. We're learning that there's more than one way to exist, more than one type of reality. And sometimes they intersect, usually in places deep beneath the earth where the barriers are thin. Echo Portal is one of those places. Probably there are others, scattered around the world, most of them sealed or forgotten. But this one stayed open, and we've been maintaining it without understanding what we were really doing. And Jude? Jude found a way through, Pacheco said. Whether that's a tragedy or a triumph, I don't know. But but I think he wants us to understand what he discovered. I think that's why he's still appearing in the corridors, still trying to make contact. He's not haunting us, he's teaching us. I looked back at the access corridor entrance, at the darkness beyond the concealed panel. Should we go back down, try to establish more direct communication? Not yet, Pacheco said. You've given the tunnel enough attention for one night. Let it digest what happened, let the patterns adjust. In a few weeks, we'll do another inspection. And maybe this time we'll see more, understand more. That's how it works with Echo Portal. Slowly, gradually, layer by layer, it reveals itself to those patient enough to keep paying attention. We walked back to our trucks together, leaving the tunnel entrance behind. But I knew I would be back, probably sooner than a few weeks. The patterns I had seen in that chamber, the sense of something trying to communicate across an unbridgeable gap, had lodged themselves in my mind like a splinter. I could not stop thinking about them, could not stop wondering what other information they might convey if I just spent more time observing, more time learning their language. As I drove away from Echo Portal that night, heading back toward normal highways and normal loads, I kept my radio tuned to Channel 9. Waiting for the call that would inevitably come, the message that would tell me the tunnel needed maintenance, needed attention, needed someone to descend into the depths and witness the patterns once more. Because that was my role now. Not just a maintainer, but a witness. Someone who had seen the space where realities intersect and had come back to tell about it, even though the telling would always be incomplete, always fall short of the actual experience. In my rearview mirror, I could see the mountain silhouetted against the night sky, and I imagined the chambers beneath it, the passages winding through stone, the deep spaces where the light pulsed and the patterns danced. Somewhere in those spaces, Jude existed in a form that was no longer entirely human, trying to bridge the gap between what he had been and what he had become, and somewhere in those same spaces, something else existed too. Something that had been there long before the tunnel was built, long before humans ever walked these mountains. Something that was patient and curious and willing to teach, if only we were willing to learn in return. I drove through the night, but I never really left Echo Portal behind. It stayed with me, a presence at the edge of my awareness, breathing its slow rhythm, pulsing its greenish light, waiting for my return, because that was the truth that Dirk could not accept, and that Pacheco had understood all along. Once you descended into those chambers, once you witnessed the patterns and felt the vibration and understood even a fraction of what was being offered, you were changed. Not lost, not trapped, but fundamentally altered in ways that could not be undone. And sooner or later, you would answer the call to go back down, to learn more, to understand more, to eventually make the same choice that Jude had made, to step through the interface and become something new, something that existed in both realities at once, a bridge between the solid world and the pattern world. I did not know if I would make that choice. Not yet. But I knew I would have the opportunity, probably many times over the years ahead. And each time it would become a little harder to say no, a little more tempting to take that final step and see what existed on the other side. Echo Portal was not just a tunnel through a mountain. It was a question that the mountain itself was asking. And all of us who maintained it, who descended into its depths, who witnessed its patterns, we were all moving slowly, inevitably, toward the moment when we would finally answer that question with our own transformation. The road stretched ahead of me, dark and empty, and I drove on through the Colorado night, carrying the mountain's question with me, knowing that someday, perhaps soon, I would return with my answer.